Okay, good evening from me. Wow, it's 5:45 UK time in the evening. Wow, it's already September. Where has the summer in the Northern Hemisphere gone? It's been very mixed this summer. August, looking at the analytical data on the channel, has been a bit of a slow month, but that's generally what happens every year. I think, uh, especially in Europe and the UK, there's a little bit of sporting fatigue this time of year. Of course, we've got the build up obviously in August to the Football League season. Transfer deadline day is a day later this year, which is interesting. So we'll have to see if there's any deadline transfers. Big discussion about where if and where Mason Greenwood gets signed. He's never going to play for Manchester United again. We know that. Also, in next week the Rugby World Cup starts, and yeah, a lot of talk about the Rugby World Cup and the chances of certain nations. England and Wales are in a very precarious position. Obviously, last week England lost to Fiji for the first time in their history, which stunned a lot of people. Although it's not unexpected, Fiji have had more time as a squad to prepare together. They've got some very talented players, and it's good signs for the second tier nations on the growth of uh, nations in that second and third tier category. But Wales and England do have a lot of problems. Steve Borthwick has a very tough job on his hands going forward. And, does he keep his job after the World Cup? How do England do at the World Cup? Yeah, there's a lot of issues there. Players getting suspended, so the group stages could be difficult. Some key players are suspended for the start of the group stages, which is a problem. Some of his selections of players going to the World Cup have been questioned. So there's that. In the NRL, the West Tigers definitely now have the wooden spoon. They are a second year in a row, so we can do a video on the West Tigers wooden spoon and thoughts in that regard. South Sydney Rabbitohs have missed out on the top eight, so now we have to see how the North Queensland Cowboys do against Penrith. Penrith look like they've named like their strongest available team. Obviously, Penrith are going after the minor premiership. Brisbane losing yesterday to the Melbourne Storm, so the minor premiership race is on. Of course, the Canberra Raiders are in a precarious position as well. If North Queensland lose, Canberra are in, regardless of what they do in their game. So that's starting to heat up. There's some big teams that have missed the finals. Parramatta, last year's grand finalists and runners up, they haven't made the top eight. South Sydney, the year before, they were grand finalists. They haven't made the top eight. So there's some teams that have really struggled this season. The second half of the season for South Sydney has been a disaster. There's a lot of question marks surrounding Latrell Mitchell and his future, and criticism of his play. They were beaten by a weakened Roosters side earlier today. I watched bits of that game. South Sydney weren't at the races. And of course, Latrell Mitchell was suspended for that game. So there are some question marks over Latrell Mitchell. I've got to do another video on him. Is he a fullback? Is he a centre? That kind of thing. Is he a winger? Because he can play multiple positions in the back line. I think left centre is his best position, but that's another topic for another day. Yeah, France do look like the team to beat. Ireland look pretty strong as well. South Africa are looking pretty good. They hammered the All Blacks. The Springboks hammered the All Blacks with a record-breaking win at Twickenham last week. So it's looking a very interesting and unpredictable World Cup this time round. But I'm not seeing a lot of fanfare around this World Cup. It's not getting the same attention as the tournament did in 2019 or in 2015. Rugby union as a sport, as one of the rugby footballing codes, or one of the footballing codes. There's a lot going on in rugby union, a lot of debating points, the finances of the game, rule changes, interpretation of rule changes, suspensions. There's a lot going on there, but there's a handful of nations that look really tasty. There's some big nations that look kind of wobbly, and there's some emerging nations that could get out the group stage or have a really good group stage. So this looks like a wide open World Cup. France, I would say, at home favourites, yes. Ireland, one of the few teams to beat France in the last couple of years. Look tasty as well. Can they get over the quarterfinal hump? Can they get further into the tournament? Can they get into the latter stages? semi-finals, finals, third, fourth place playoff. Andy Farrell is establishing himself now as a world-class head coach. Um, you know, could the RFU swallow their pride and get into discussions with Andy Farrell in the future? I don't think Steve Borthwick is the right guy right now to take England forward, but there's a load of questions there. Wales got their problems as well. So this is a very, very interesting World Cup in that regard. Italy look exciting. Um, yeah, look, I've got to do my updated favourite sports list because when I last did it in 2018, rugby union featured quite highly. I think it has slipped down the list of sports that I enjoy watching. I would say that. I do think rugby union, the financial issues that rugby union at club level and even in the international game that it faces have been made worse by um, by the pandemic, and it has highlighted a lot of structural issues within the sport. Also, they're being very reactionary to head contact and foul play rather than proactive, and that's due to lax refereeing for many, many years. They've allowed a lot of bad habits and bad techniques in the tackle area, the ruck, the maul, the scrum to basically the contact area to get into the game. Um, Over a long period of time, they've been very reactive in a lot of the rule changes in that area rather than proactive. I think rugby league's being a bit more proactive when it comes to head contact, uh, uh, and uh, and I think the fear that rugby union has of a similar CTE lawsuit that the NHL and the NFL, for example, in North America has faced in recent years. I think there is a fear that that could bankrupt the sport or be very ruinous financially for the sport that already clearly has financial issues and structural problems. Obviously, there's still a big debate in rugby league again about the enforcement of suspensions and the inconsistencies there. Do I think union should have not turned professional? No, I think it should have. I think the way they've handled the transition from an amateur game officially, although by the late 80s, early 90s, the top clubs were pretty much professional. I think the transition from amateur status to professional status has they've got that wrong. I think they've tried to copy rugby league and football like rival sports too much, and I think they've got the implementation wrong. I think you could argue maybe certain leagues or certain countries turned professional before the structures were in place. They've definitely, you can clearly see that there are issues in regards to turning the game professional on the money side of things and the distribution of funds and developing tier two and tier three nations to a high enough standard, which are now being corrected in more recent years. But look at Major League Rugby and the French professional system. They're what I would say are successful professional models. I think certain aspects of the United Rugby Championship, especially Ireland and Italy, have done rather well. But other countries and other league competitions, like the Super Rugby system, for example, has been badly handled, and hence why it's fragmented into what it is now, and why the South African teams have obviously decided to go with the United Rugby Championship. And we can argue the pros and cons of that. But again, I circle back to 2019, Augustine Pichot, Bill Beaumont, that run off to become World Rugby head. And Augustine Pichot obviously wanted to keep professionalism in place, but distribute the funds a little bit more evenly and a bit more fairly, and restructure the finances of the game, the international game, and the various unions or federations, depending on which part of the world you're in, decided to go with the status quo with Bill Beaumont, and COVID obviously sped up the financial issues that the game has. Uh, 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 the international game is, I think, in a decent place. It's the club game that's a mess, absolute mess. Do I think it should have turned professional? I don't know on that one, but we could have the same argument with rugby league as well, with certain aspects of rugby league at club level, especially in Europe. It's a bit of a shambles, and North America, it's definitely a shambles. And we'll see what the NRL do with their Vegas games next year. They're already building it up already. I think there's a long-term plan in place to invest in North America via taking games to Vegas. So we'll see how that pans out. Obviously, the NRL is very, very aware of the fact that the NHL is now, for the first time ever, in a couple of weeks, taking pre-season games to Melbourne, which is in their backyard and the AFL's backyard. I think they're very mindful of that, and the potential for the North American leagues to really make financial and playing inroads into um, what is their you know their backyard basically. The NRL and the AFL have made massive strides in growing the fan base in North America. A lot of people disagree with me on that, but the figures back it up. When the NRL and then the AFL resumed play, they were the first proper major professional leagues in the world to resume following the pandemic, or the initial phase of the pandemic, and viewership and interest skyrocketed because a lot of North American fans, without the NFL, without the CFL, the NHL, the NBA, Major League Soccer, Major League Baseball, were bored and they were stuck at home and they couldn't do anything. And suddenly, these two brutal contact sports in Australia, with you know resumed and showed that you could get play done, and very, very quickly fans were back in attendance. And if there had to be arrangements made with state and regional governments to move into bubbles, they showed they could really adapt very, very flexibly when there was a lot of issues in the US and Canada. The CFL didn't have a season in 2020, struggling financially. The NHL lost money for a couple of years. The Major League Soccer had to go into a bubble site. Major League Baseball was obviously ended up with a lockout. So there was a lot of issues in North America with sport, and then they saw these two Australian leagues start up and look at the bounce that both leagues have had. The women's league, the NRLW's had expanded quicker than anticipated. They've got a new team in the Dolphins. There's the 25th team expansion. Is in the pipeline within the next couple of years. There have been issues, however, at the CBA, the drawn out CBA negotiations. I think highlighted some of the issues coming out of the pandemic and on a financial level and with the backdate payments that the players are owed, players' insurance, medical provision, retraining, that kind of stuff. Yes, rugby union. This has been a debate for many years on the channel, from the early days in 2018, 2019. I've got a lot of subscribers in Australia, a lot of viewers in Australia. They all say the same thing, that the grassroots game is in got problems. I think the Israel Folau situation a couple of years ago highlighted a lot of the governance issues that are in play, and the direction the sport's taking. The funding the quality isn't good enough. They're not producing them or a Gregan that they were, or a Flatley that they were 20 years ago. Yet they're still making the latter stages of World Cups, which amazes me considering how dysfunctional the sport is down under in Australia. There is a lot of dysfunction. They've had issues with sponsors, they've had issues with finance, with teams' finance, Super Rugby collapse. And that's before COVID, the Super Rugby collapse. We have to remember that. The domestic game in Australia below Super Rugby level is shambolic, and that they are bleeding young youth talent to league, both in the women's and men's games. A lot of talented players who, at various levels in at age grade, are getting snapped up by league and by AFL Aussie rules. So there are issues with player retention. They're overpaying league players as basically mercenaries to plug gaps. I think Suoliti is going to be the next league player that they bribe over. That doesn't fix the problem of player development. Rugby league's done it for them. Then they pay these massive $1 million contracts to these league players who don't stick around necessarily, who then go back to league at some point. And the All Blacks are doing the same. Roger Tuivasa-Sheck's gone over to Union. He's coming back to league. His union stay wasn't as long as anticipated. Israel Folau obviously started out in league, bit of Aussie rules in there, ends up in Union, was a very good player for the Wallabies. despite his off-field dramas and his political and social views, ends up back in league for a while. So it's become a very expensive exercise to overpay for not invest in the youth system and the grassroots system domestically, and the team on the field, and you know the performances on the field and the pressure on the team is grown as a result. But it is a mess. Rugby union, it's a well-known fact that rugby union in Australia is not in a good state. So it's not just England and Wales that have problems. It is, oh look, New Zealand, the All Blacks and rugby union and the Black Ferns, they have a. It's like South Africa as well. They have a production line of talent. They just, I don't know what they feed them in the Southern Hemisphere. They have a production line of talent, but there's not enough money to go around. That's been known for a long time. Again, they do the same thing with the Pacific Islanders. They're also trying to get league players to swap codes and go to union. That's been going on for a while. Um, the resurgence of the New Zealand Warriors and the potential for a second NRL side in New Zealand is a problem. But they are bleeding talent to to rugby league as well, and there is money issues. Now, on the rugby league side of things, at grassroots level below the Warriors, yeah, there are some structural issues and financial issues there, but they're also having issues and there are problems. And when one of the most consistent and greatest international setups and talent hotbeds is having problems, it does highlight a lot of issues. Um, so, but this is not a new problem. There's not enough money to go around. New Zealand is a small population. It's a much smaller economy than Australia. But as I say, there's not enough money to go around, which is why we're seeing a lot of Australians and New Zealanders go to Major League Rugby and into the European leagues. They can get paid. They can get more money. They can get paid a lot more money going to the Northern Hemisphere. Um, an Anglo Welsh league for rugby union in the UK. Yeah, I think that's a possibility, but then that obviously weakens the United Rugby Championship to a certain extent. Uh, Obviously, the Irish and the South African sides are dominating, although the Italian clubs, the Italian region's doing quite well. They've improved massively. Scotland's got issues as well. Um, but I think that weakens the United Rugby Championship, and I think the various unions that make up that league, I think they would have a say if the Welsh teams ended up pulling out. I think that would have a detrimental impact on the quality of the URC, which some of the nations do quite well. The Welsh teams have been struggling and struggling quite 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 some time. But is it the actual answer? Is there enough willingness to cooperate between the WRU and the RFU? Two unions have to cooperate. They haven't cooperated. Even with the Lions, there's always a bit of resistance of cooperation. England and Wales with the FA. I mean, yeah, we have a combined English Welsh league system with the best Welsh clubs in football playing in the English league system and playing very well. And the four biggest clubs are now all in the football league and have played at a high level and won silverware. So there is that debate that they can do it in football at a club level. Should rugby union follow suit? That's going to require a lot of cooperation and a lot of restructuring of the club game in both countries for that to be a reality. And obviously, we debate pros and cons on that, and whether there's the willingness with both unions to, swallow their pride a little bit and cooperate. We shall see. Oh yeah, the top NRL sides. I mean, look, scouting is key. Scouting is vital. And the NRL seems to have, when it comes to rugby league in the Southern Hemisphere, has some great talent scouts. Um, some gems have been, like Tavare, for example, at the Dolphins Union. Cooper Cronk is a famous one. Was a Union schoolboy and then got converted to league. One of the greatest halfbacks the game has ever seen. In my personal opinion, one of my favourite players. You could see him being a scrum half or a fly half for a rugby union side, and that's to Australia's loss. So yes, I would say you could argue, yeah, the NRL do plunder the talent, but if rugby union is not willing to protect its talent and reward its talent, then a rival sport or league will pinch them. And this is why we're seeing an exodus of really talented Australian players either choosing to play for another country. We've seen a lot of Australians play for the Italian national side because of a parent or parents who are of Italian heritage. There's a big Italian population in Melbourne, for example. Um, Christian Vieri, football, could have played for Australia, ended up playing, obviously, for Italy. There's a couple of Croatian players who are eligible for Australia but chose to play for Croatia. So it's not just a rugby union problem, but it is clear and obvious that scouting in rugby union is not what it was in Australia, that they've fallen off a cliff. Player development, funding, structures, the quality of play as well. It's also seen as a very elite, snobby sport, more so than in the Northern Hemisphere. It's seen as not a working class or middle class sport. It's seen more as an upper class private schoolboy kind of thing, which is not truly the case. There's a lot of really good, hard-working, on the coalface type of people who play uni in Australia, but the funding isn't there. The funding just isn't there, and the structures in place and the pathways are not there. So it's not just the NRL or rugby league; it's Aussie rules as well. They are using their extra financial clout, the fact that they can offer an 18 or 19-year-old a better first contract than rugby union, and the fact that the pathway structures are in place. There's so many former rugby union talents in both the men's and women's games in the AFL and NRL. With the AFLW and the NRLW, that are ex-union players. There's a lot of a fair chunk of the NRLW have played sevens at the Olympics for Australia and New Zealand and Fiji, and they've been offered, you know, better structures, better pay, better pathways, and they're coming over. So even in the women's game, it's obvious. Um, the football, the League Cup. Yeah, I think you know I think the fact that the League Cup starts as early as it does, it's mad. I mean, we're only in on the 1st of September, and we're almost a month into the European football season, which I find ridiculous. We've already seen actually in the end of July qualifying rounds for the European competitions. The football season seems to be starting earlier and earlier. Um, Yeah, it's mad that obviously at this stage, we're at 1st of September and the football season's been going for over a month is ridiculous. I think the season's too long. I think the club structures are a mess. I mean, we've already got an international break coming up, and Southgate's named in it his squad, which I find absolutely ridiculous. And there's players in that squad who aren't even playing in Europe anymore. They're playing in Saudi Arabia. Just shows how I think Southgate, while he might have got us to that stage of tournaments, I think Southgate needs to be gone as the manager. I won't be watching any of that personally. It's not tournament football. I think the international breaks, there's too many. They're too disruptive. I think every off season should be the qualifying. Uh, campaigns, and then the following off season should be the tournament of the World Cup qualifying campaign, Euros qualify. That's how they should structure it. Um, it's too disruptive to the league season. It's why the league season starts as early as it does and finishes as late as it does. And some of these qualifiers are just painful viewing. I haven't watched a qualifier for several years now, so there's that. If the English and Welsh unions have not been humbled enough to know that they need each other, they never will. That lack of cooperation is there. Um, the fact that we have 3 international breaks in 3 months tells you all you need to know about the structures of football and how I think, UEFA and FIFA and the domestic leagues, they need to, and the same with CONMEBOL and the same with CONCACAF and the various regional governing bodies, they need to figure out a far better and more streamlined calendar because it doesn't matter which league you follow or where you are in the world and what club you support. You, this is an ongoing issue. It's not the World Cup last year with the extended winter break and the disruption to the season, which has also impacted the transfer market. The transfer market's open into September now. ridiculous. Let that sink in. But no, the fact that we're having 3 international breaks before Christmas, is just farcical in my opinion. It's absolutely farcical. Do it all in the summer. Do all the qualifiers in the summer. Get rid of the pointless international friendlies. Get rid of the Nations League, which I think has had mixed results and I've never bought into, because I don't think that is the it's a better solution than the pointless friendlies we had before, but I don't think it's the right solution. I think the idea of restructuring international calendars is fine, but I don't think it just clutters it up even more. I think that was a reactionary decision taken by UEFA because they noticed that the ticket sales for friendlies weren't great and the TV viewership and the streaming viewership online wasn't as what it used to be. Um, oh, look, it's not pointless to San Marino and Andorra. It gets their better players some TV airtime, so they can be picked up by a slightly bigger club and work their way through the various domestic and leagues around Europe. I've got nothing against Andorra and San Marino wanting to better themselves, but the way the international calendar works is broken. In my opinion, there are better ways to structure it. That's my honest opinion on that. You could argue the same for a lot of sports. Ice hockey is another one where the NHL seems to be trying to, in parallel with the IIHF, trying to work out international ice hockey alongside the IOC with the Olympics. So there's 3 governing bodies basically trying to sort out the international game there at an international level globally, and you know, the NHL wants to get the best international head-to-head tournament. Well, they've had multiple attempts at doing a World Cup. You can argue the pros and cons of how they would, achieve that. The IIHF, obviously, the World Championship structure is fantastic. I like it, but unfortunately, the best players aren't always available because they're playing the Stanley Cup playoffs, and the NHL season is now finishing later and later and later every year. So it's not just European football where we're having this debate. Um, Who's the favourite for the World Cup? I think France or Ireland. Springboks, don't count out the All Blacks. I think there's Argentina look tasty. There's going to be some surprises in this tournament, but I think it's more open than in previous tournaments. Pre-qualifiers are using all other confederations apart from in Europe because the depth of talent in Europe is a lot higher. Apart from South America, South America and Europe is where the best playing talent is from. The most successful nations are from. And all the Ballon d'Or winners are either, apart from I think a handful from Africa, are either European or South American. So, and I think they use pre-qualifiers in South America. South America's only got a handful of nations, um, but the fact that other confederations work out, okay, we've got a lot of weaker nations with smaller player bases. Um, we may never know. We may never know. Possibly. There's a possibility. I mean, we hypothetically could see San Marino East Timor. That would be kind of fun, potentially. But again, it doesn't matter what the nation is. The fact we are constantly having all these international breaks, almost on a monthly basis, up until Christmas, New Year, and then we have a few more. I think we have even the same amount after the New Year as well. So I think there's about 5 or 6 international breaks in total, and then we have a tournament next summer. So it is a bit it's frustrating, and especially the December to January period is heavily congested anyway. Some leagues have a 2-week break or a 10-day break. Other leagues just as soon as Christmas is done, you're playing again. And on Boxing Day, I do think we need to look at the international calendar seriously and go, is this really beneficial for players, fans? The TV companies and the sponsors, obviously, they get their content, but I don't really watch the qualifiers. It doesn't appeal to me. The players are only in camp for that very short period. The quality of play is not as good as the actual tournament play. Um, the intensity level of the games isn't great. So you'll see some teams like England or Germany regularly, breathe through qualifying. barely dropping any points, and then in the tournament, it's a completely different thing. Germany, both the men's and women's, is fallen off a cliff the last few years, really fallen off a cliff. And I argued last year about is Bayern Munich's dominance really hurting the German national side? I think it is. I think it really is. I think France somehow, with the team they have, take out a couple of players and they are bang average. Their domestic league's a joke. Um, Spain and Portugal, the Portuguese league, ironically, is a very interesting league to look at. Only 5 teams have ever won the league title, but the cup winners and the league cup winners is where it gets interesting because that's a very competitive. That's where the competitiveness comes from. The Portuguese league is probably more interesting than the Spanish league in that regard because I think Boavista and Braga at some point are going to challenge the big three on a more consistent basis. Um, but the Portuguese league can't keep hold of its best talent anymore. But again, and it's the last decade or so, the UEFA coefficient and the way that the money side of things has really shifted to a handful of leagues and a handful of clubs has really distorted European club football, and not in a good way. It's completely disjointed the dynamic, and and now we've got the Saudi money. The, the finances, the economy of football is a false economy. It's I always liken it to the subprime mortgage industry, financial, in the build up to the global financial crash just over 14, 15 years ago. It's exactly the same. The economy is a false economy built upon debt and overinflated salaries and fees. It's heavily overcharged and it's a false economy. It's not a natural economy because as COVID approved, you take the fans out, suddenly the TV companies lose their minds. The French league doesn't even have a TV deal. One of the big 5 leagues in Europe doesn't have a TV deal in place. It collapsed. The French league's in crisis. PSG have now realised we cannot. This is not good. Like, we're actually not making money. We're now making a massive loss, and all their best players have buggered off. And they oh god, the history of the Portuguese clubs and their fan bases. The fact that the city of Porto can have 2 clubs at the top level in Porto and Boavista, people don't realise that. The fact that in Lisbon, Belenenses, people forget that they were one of the big clubs at one point. That they can have 4, I think no 5. I think 5 clubs at the professional level in a city the size of Lisbon. People don't realise just how the impact of the professional game and how well supported. People think, oh, the big three, they must have all the fans. They don't. There's a reason why Vitoria, Academia, and Braga have massive fan bases and big stadiums. There's a reason why, Boavista have a big fan base. The whole island of Madeira is Funchal. It's just there is every. I mean, as I say about a lot of the club histories, like this is what North American fans don't realise. What they watch is the Champions League and to a certain extent the Europa League, and they think the Premier League and La Liga, and it's just a handful of clubs dominate with massive fan bases. And in reality, you go to London, if you're on the wrong side of the road in North London, you're getting your head kicked in because you've got Arsenal and Spurs. If you go on the wrong side of the road in South London, you could bump into a Millwall or a Charlton fan, or and you're in trouble. Or Palace. West London, you've got Chelsea, Fulham, Brentford. If you're North, it's the same in the European leagues. Like if you go to, Geneva and you're on the wrong side of the road, or you go into the wrong neighbourhood, you are in trouble. Same in Milan. It's the same in Rome. If you're in the wrong neighbourhood, you are in serious trouble. Like a lot of people don't realise how fanatical the fan bases are. It's like you got one of my friends is a Levski Sofia ultra. Yeah, you got CSKA Sofia and you got Levski Sofia, and I tell you now, You don't want to be on the wrong street corner in the wrong neighborhood because you ain't getting out of there. It's not just you're going to get some verbal. It's like Partisan versus Red Star Belgrade. If you are on the wrong side of the road, that is you are in trouble, big trouble. And people and the North Americans, especially the US fans, I've seen some Instagrams and some TikToks and some YouTube videos where they go to Europe for the first time and they go to the kiosk. Let's say we'll go with English football, 'cause that's easy, or Scottish football, and they want to buy a ticket. And the kiosk, the ticket salesman goes, "For what team, home or away?" And they're like, "What?" It's like, "Well, you're segregated for your own safety." Although that actually breeds further resentment for the authorities and the opposite fan base. And they go, "What?" It's like, "What team, home or away?" And they go, and then they basically explain, and they have to be told that this isn't like the NFL where you can sit wherever you want. This is you are sat in the wrong section and you're cheering for the wrong team. Um, you're not getting out of that stadium alive. In some countries, it's you're ending up in the back of an ambulance or in a body bag, and they really are stunned by this. And I think this is what the US, I don't think, is fully prepared for when they co-host the World Cup in a couple of years. Is the European South American fan bases? There's no fooling around here. This is you are going to war. This is tribal. This is for these fans. It's like the rivalry between towns and cities goes back to the medieval period, and there's always that rivalry with certain you know certain cities. I don't think they fully appreciate the intensity of some of these rivalries and derby matches and the sheer warfare, the absolute sheer street warfare. It is something that they are going to learn. Something they're going to learn. There are some cities where you might have 6 or 7 professional clubs playing in the same league, and certain neighbourhoods will go for that one team, and certain neighbourhoods go for the other team. Um, and like I say, if you get the wrong train, get at the wrong train stop, and you are in serious bother. And the North Americans, especially the US fans, seriously are just unprepared for the culture. They are complete. It's the same with ice hockey in Europe, basketball. They are completely unprepared for the tribal nature, um, because of the history of the town or the city that these clubs are from. As I discussed in a recent video, the differences in Europe in sporting culture between North America and Europe. It, they are not prepared. So it's going to be interesting when the US co-hosts. Very interesting. I'm not sure about the future of Ellis Park, which I've heard is an increasingly dangerous part of South Africa. The Lions might have to play their future games at a safer location. South Africa's got a lot of issues. I mean, obviously, sadly, there was that massive fire in Joburg, which has claimed a lot of lives. But a lot of it, you've got to look at the government. You've got to look at the government. Ellis Park is a stadium that is on my bucket list. I want to go there, but when you have these negative headlines coming out and the social issues that South Africa has, it's going to put off not only investment internally but foreign investment as well. And that's when you've got foreign fans going over to watch games. They're going to be like, now I'd rather go to a game in Cape Town or a game in Durban or a game in Port Elizabeth or a game in Bloemfontein, and they don't want to, or Pretoria, and they don't want to go to Ellis Park in Joburg. It's as simple as that. Um, but there are massive issues in South Africa, and sport should be a uniting factor. But when one of the most successful South African teams may be going, we may need to move location to a different neighbourhood, a different stadium. You lose that match day revenue. You lose that investment that sport can bring, which is a big problem. And other teams have moved for a variety of reasons. A lot of it's financial infrastructure, but when you've got the issues of social problems that some areas of South Africa and some of the big cities have, it is a concern. I've got a lot of South African friends over here in the UK, and there's a reason why they've left South Africa. It's not because of work; it's because of the safety aspect. Um, they could quite easily do the same jobs in South Africa and have a good income and live quite comfortably, but the social issues, the crime issues, the safety issues is why a lot of skilled, educated, hard-working South Africa. It's a brain drain. It's causing a brain drain. It's people are leaving en masse. So, and sport should be that unifier, that positivity. And unfortunately, some parts of the world, the opposite is happening, and the sports teams and the sports leagues have to look at it and go, we can't guarantee the safety of our fans, not because of rival fans having disorder, but um, issues in the local community is keeping fans away. And this is where I think sport should do a more positive with engaging with local communities, and bringing investment into local communities. But the pandemic and some other economic issues have contributed to this. Um, so we shall see what happens with the future of Ellis Park and the Springboks playing games there and the Lions playing games there, because that in theory should bring a lot of revenue to the neighbourhood, to the area, and with that comes jobs, comes investment. But there's a lot of issues on a political and economic nature, which you've got to leave at the door of the South African government. Um, the South African government, for a long, long time, has failed with improving the quality of life of its citizens. So that's where sport and politics, unfortunately, collide. Um, Obviously, I've always had a rule on this channel to try and keep politics out of it as much as I can, but that's becoming increasingly difficult every day. Um, I mean, yeah, they might have to do what the Stormers did, but again, that is a South. It's not just a South African issue when it comes to economic and social problems. It's a bit more widespread in the Western world than people realise. Um, we've seen it here in Europe. I mean, look at the Stade de France and the Champions League final, and the issues there. And you look at Marseille and Nice, and we look at France with some of their problems and with the riots they had in the summer, and the concerns about the Tour de France, the concerns about the Rugby Union World Cup with fan safety and visitor safety, and there's a lot of issues. France is going through a similar thing. Just it and they're a far wealthier country, for people's average salaries. There are massive gang issues and crime and economic problems in France. That same here in the UK. There's certain areas of certain towns and cities in the UK which are just no go, where crime levels are through the roof, unemployment's through the roof, and again you have to look at government, and you have to look at policing, and you have to look at investment and deprivation and local mismanagement, regional mismanagement, and sport can be a positive in reversing some of those issues and improving the quality of life for the locals. But we shall see. Are Man City's achievements respected? Well, the club itself is very historical, but obviously with the club and their spending and off-field dramas, are they respected? I don't think sports fans are a fickle bunch. We know this. They are very, very fickle. They're like sheep. But I think certain aspects of Man City and how they've conducted themselves off the field raise a few eyebrows. Some of the things that they're under investigation for. Obviously, with what we've now seen with the the financial aspect of the sport, um, the lack of atmosphere at the Etihad, the fact they still can't sell out the stadium as regularly as I think the hierarchy would like. On the field, you can't dispute they've got a great team, they've got a great manager. They've been successful, but there are question marks about how they got that success. But there's several clubs you could argue there's question marks about the success on the field. You go to Italy and you ask fans what they feel like Juventus and AC Milan and their successes, and the answer will be the same. Go to France about PSG, the answer will be the same. Back in the 90s, the question marks were about Marseille. The answer would have been the same. There's the off-field dealings of clubs, and as I say, the false economy, the overinflated finances, and the, the overcharged financial aspects of the game, and where the money comes from, and the governance side. Yeah, are they respected? Probably not. Um, Probably not. Question marks, about Chelsea as well. The spending of some of these clubs is ridiculous. The lack of academy talents, that with all the money they've got behind the owners, the amount of money they spend, they could have spent more in the academies and how they deal with the transfer market. Um, uh, Man City, as I say, are a historical club. I done my club history video last year. Obviously, now they've won that Champions League. That video is dated somewhat. Obviously, I'll have to revisit certain clubs. Um, but I think it's more um, the the that lack of success for such a long period from the 70s to the 2010s, I think, is where people forget they were a very successful club for a very, very long time. And they predate Man United. I think it's the way the branding of themselves, how they sell themselves to that. Because I remember when I was at school, there was a lad I went to school with, the same age as me, and he was a Man City fan. And of course, at the time, I'm a Blackburn fan, he's a Man City fan. It wasn't fashionable to be a Man City fan. It wasn't. Um, Everyone wanted to be Man United, and our kids, kids are like sponges, they wanted to be like your Man Uniteds, your Arsenals at the time, because they were the successful clubs, and we stood out like sore thumbs that we were obviously the outcasts, um, and yeah, it wasn't fashionable to be a Man City fan in the 90s. If you were a young kid watching the Premier League in the early days of the Premier League, Man City was seen as crap. They had towards the late 90s and the early 2000s. They had their struggles. They get purchased by. Well, they move into the City of Manchester Stadium, the former Commonwealth Games Stadium, in 2002, 2003. I think it was that season they moved in. Well, that time, a few years later, they get purchased. The crest gets rebranded. They go through a rebrand. The purchase goes through. They spend big but can't win. The same questions are going to be asked about Newcastle United until they win their first trophy under the current ownership. Then they win their first piece of silverware, and then the rest is history. Then UEFA start investigating them about their sponsorship arrangements, secret third-party contracts, and their financial dealings. And are they being open and transparent? So, but yeah, there was a period where Stockport and Bury and Oldham were above them in the league structure. And Oldham have been a Premier League club. Got to do a video on Oldham Athletic. It's so interesting when I do that video because obviously their recent struggles on and off the field. But yeah, there was a period in time where Stockport and Bury were above them in the league system, and there was a period in time where Oldham were a league above them at one point. So it's amazing how the tide can turn. And yeah, we can go back and we can look at key moments. You could argue Sean Gota and his key goals at various points. Uh, get them back into the big time. The struggles they've had at various points in the Premier League era. Some of the bad transfers they've made. They've obviously now got some really good scouting, which they didn't have initially. But yeah, there are issues there. Do I think Italy could make the quarterfinals? It's potential. Potential. The potential's there. I think this Rugby World Cup is going to be the hardest to predict because some of the big nations are really floundering. really floundering. My thoughts on the Tyson Fury and Ngannou uh, fight. I think boxing has become farcical, personally, in recent years. Become very, very farcical. So you've got Logan Paul with his. It's just farcical. Boxing as a sport is farcical. Do you think anyone would pump a load of money into a traditional Manchester club? Well, Stockport's got a bit of money behind them at the level they're at. They've got an owner who's invested for that level. Big Manchester club's a hindrance. Again, it's the way Manchester United completely in the Premier League era sold themselves. They had that class '92, but it's the way they marketed themselves. And you know, you could argue Liverpool the same in Liverpool Football Club in the same in Merseyside. It's just some clubs did really well out of the Premier League era for marketing. So your Man United and your Arsenal have really sold their product really well globally. And I would say Man City, I don't think have necessarily their branding or their marketing has actually been as successful as Man United. But club football's a mess. I don't enjoy it as much as I used to. I don't enjoy, football as much as I used to. I think I've definitely fallen out of love with the beautiful game, as you call it. I think I've fallen out of love with a lot of sports, so I've got to do an updated my favourite sports list for 2023. I think that'll be a very, very interesting video. I'll have to rewatch the 2018 video that I did, like listing my favourite sports, because in that 5 year period, my view on what sports I like watching and enjoy watching has definitely changed. And a lot of it is to do with accessibility. A lot of it's to do with visibility, and a lot of it's to do with the off off field dramas that a lot of sports have, and is it truly representative of the fan base and the origins of said sport? So with football and its working class origins, I think have been ignored. I think the clubs have really milked the fans. I think the governance has been poor, and I don't think the quality is as good as the '90s and the 2000s. I really think the quality has declined. I think that is a fair assessment to give um, in regards to the quality that we see on a week to week basis at club level and even international level. I think the quality is not as good as what it once was. I think players are now overcoached. I think they overcoach them. I think they coach the flair out of them a little bit. That's why I think certain teams, when you watch them as a neutral, like Leeds, were entertaining because they could not defend. But um, but there is the potential of a wealthy person going, I want to buy that club. Absolutely. But I think again the economy, the footballing economy, the economics is a false economy, and I think we've reached saturation point. I think there's going to be a point where the money bubble does completely explode. I mean, football is creaking. I think COVID has definitely deflate. Well, has it though? Because spending's gone through the roof. Even though these clubs have got massive debts they can't service, they're still spending money they don't have. And the financial institutions are letting them do that. So there's going to be some point where the whole financial footballing system collapses. But again, it's falsely keeping on going. I don't know how football can sustain itself. Is £26 a good price for a second division South Wales derby? Yes. Doesn't matter what league Cardiff and Swansea are in. That is a fantastic price. I would snap your hand off for that. But that's not including the transport costs. So, but £26 is a very, very good price. That is not bad. But both clubs aren't in the Premier League right now. If that was a Premier League derby match, you're looking at about 40, 50 quid minimum. But that's maybe even more. Am I following the NHL much? It's the off season. I think we are going to see some trades and some free agent signings. There's still some free agents out there. We are seeing some professional tryouts, but I think some other big trades. When they got the Carlson trade done, I think there's some other potential, some other big trades that we on the horizon. It's going to be interesting to see how the NHL does with its Australian games and what the response is to that. Um, the fact that they are using an outdoor arena is a bit interesting. The Rod Laver Arena, but it is still technically Australian winter, and they're not officially quite in the Australian spring yet. But there's certain. I mean, it's going to be interesting how many fans are in attendance, quality of preseason games, and what the viewership figures and and how much money the NHL makes from that. But no, I do like the NHL. I it's this time of the year though. It's the off season, and again for me, it's you get that fatigue, but you get that wanting to have it back because the Stanley Cup was awarded so late and the season went so late. A legacy of the pandemic. A legacy of the pandemic is having that impact on leagues like the NHL, and I think certain commentators and fans and journalists have realised this. And no, well, look, we'll see what happens. There's been a few issues with the NHL that are talking points, and I do think taking games to Australia is one of those talking points. That, like I say, we shall see how successful or not taking games to Australia is. Yes, the US Open is going on. Yeah, I haven't really. I, it's not getting the coverage that I think it. But it's the US Open. It's a hit and miss with the US Open with the coverage and the talking points. And is it as popular as the French Open and Wimbledon? No, I think is the answer. Um, the French Open and Wimbledon are the big ones, really, for me. The ones that players want to win. Um, don't get me wrong, the Australian Open and the US Open, okay, they are great tournaments, but players want to win Wimbledon. They want to win the French Open. That's the two big majors that players want to win. Is it more popular? You get more eyes on the product because the US has a big population. There's more money in the US than Australia for sponsorship and the networks. Is it bigger than the Australian? I think it possibly is. Obviously, if you are one of the top 10, 20 players, your aim is to win all four. There are some players that are better on grass, like Federer was, and Andy Murray. I think won. Did he win the US twice? I think he did. Some players are better on the grass surface, like Federer, Sampras. Some are better on clay, Nadal, and some are better on hard courts. Ironically, Murray was better on the hard courts, like Australia, and in the I think he did win the US twice. And then you've got some players like Djokovic who just dominate on all four lucky bugs, all four surfaces. But for me, the US Open and the Australian Open, I just raise an eyebrow and go, okay. Murray won one Wimbledon, an Olympic gold, and two USs. I think you'll find he only won Wimbledon once, and he also won Olympic gold. I think he won two US Opens and one Wimbledon. I think you got them the wrong way around. The reason why you think he won two Wimbledons is 2012 Olympics, he won gold. But I would say certain players are better on the hard surfaces, certain players are better on clay, some are better on grass. Some players are just really good all round players where it doesn't matter the surface, they they just win. So Djokovic is the best all round player. We can argue like Nadal or Federer being the best on a single surface, absolutely. But the best all-round player is Djokovic, possibly the least popular champion as well, but he's the best all-round player. You could argue McEnroe and some other champions weren't particularly popular, like Connors and as well. But for an all-round champion, Djokovic dominates on all surface types. Um, but no, the US Open, I don't think it has the same kind of appeal as Wimbledon and the French Open. It doesn't seem to really tennis fans. I think because Murray straight set Djokovic with then beat Raonic. Uh, at the end of the day, he's come out and said, he's because of where he is right now in his career. long runs in the big four majors are possibly a thing of the past. I personally think Murray, the fact he's come back from that hip surgery and is still playing at the top level is ridiculous. Normally, that hip resurfacing for any player in any sport, team sport or individual sport, that's generally career over. So the fact he's trying to come back, admittedly, he's had some good runs in some tournaments, but you can see it's still hindering his movement. He's not the player he was. He's lost a bit of power. It's clearly a bit of pain there, but we've seen it in rugby league, we've seen it in rugby union, we've seen it in ice hockey. Players have these hip resurfacing operations, and more often than not, they retire within 12 months, and their careers pretty much are ended. So the fact that he's still playing is, in my opinion, ridiculous. Um, but I don't think Murray's long for professional tennis. I think he's going to retire soon. I think what what he's said in press conferences. I think yeah, his time is nearly done. So Nadal's obviously said like next year is his last year. He's going to retire, and then we just look at Djokovic and how long he's going to continue to play for. Del Potro's gone. He was playing on one leg for the latter part of his career. So some great players have played through injury, but yeah. Um, yeah, look, I mean, at his best, he was one of the best. But his career is injuries have always hindered his career from the early days. There was conditioning at the beginning when he was young, and that next big thing, and then he's had various injuries from the age of 18 till now. He's been beset by injuries consistently. But when fit, there is no doubt he was one of the best players on his day, um, in form. But you know, you look at it, it's brutal sport. Yeah, I think the wear and tear on the body is starting to show. Um, People think tennis is one of those sports where just tennis elbow is the thing. People don't realize how physically demanding tennis actually is. Um, okay, yeah, it's a non-contact sport. It's a racket sport, but it is bloody physically demanding. And the wear and tear on a tennis player's body is ridiculous. Some of the injuries, it's mostly joint injuries, like your wrists, your elbows, your shoulders, your hips, your knees, your ankles. They are wrecked. A lot of it is a sport where muscle pulls as well, the muscular injuries, the joint injuries. There's a lot of wear and tear on the body, and there's a lot of time where you're not really at home. You don't really get a break. It's you've got to play every tournament. You've got to make money. It's relentless. Um, and golf as well. A lot of people don't realise the wear and tear on a golfer's body, on the back, on the shoulders. Golf takes its toll as well. Um, so, Nadal was Philippoussis was another one. Andy Roddick was another one. But these powerful players with the power they could hit. Yeah, but they can only do it for so long. Um, do they regret? I think some golf play. I think it depends. It does depend. Do they regret it? That's an interesting one. Obviously, I've never actually interviewed a professional sportsman before. I would love to, but it is an interesting one. I think. Do they regret it? I mean, it's their livelihood at the end of the day. They some at the lower levels they rely on tournament to tournament. They rely on prize money to prize money. And if you haven't got that big name sponsor or those sponsors, um, you do and those sponsorships, those corporate adverts they do. You know, then yeah, it can be a struggle. Um, I think clay is a bit more forgiving than grass. Grass is actually a harder surface. Clay is a bit more forgiving. There's more competitiveness in the surface. But yeah, if you are not when they have the sponsorships help a lot, but when you're outside a certain top 100 or something, it's hard to get by. You are surviving from tournament to tournament. You're barely making any money, which is an issue. Tennis, especially golf, not so much. But tennis has definitely got to grapple with. Um, do they regret it though? It's a labour of love, I suppose. Same with snooker. It's a labour of love. That's mentally taxing. It's more of a labour of love, really. Once you get your first big win, suddenly things start falling into place. Um, or if you go on a run in a tournament, you get that exposure and that interest, and then sponsors come along and go, "We're happy for you to represent our brand." So let's say Monster, for example, they see this young, exciting young American player. You might go on a run. Oh, he's young, he's athletic. We'll happily, as an American company, slap our happily. Um, happy to sponsor you. Will Djokovic be more respected for his achievements when he hangs up the racket? Obviously, he cannot, you know, dispute him as a player. Obviously, he is a controversial character off the court, and we can all agree on that. I think there's no disagreement there. He's got his fans, he's got his people who don't particularly like him. He is ruthless. Um, no doubt on that. I don't think he's the most popular champion though. Especially from the Balkans, we've had some great players come out of the former Yugoslavia. Goran Ivanisevic, however, was I think the people's champion. He was so laid back, and he was just so Goran Ivanisevic. If you're of the right age, you'll remember when he won Wimbledon. He went on a 10-day bender back in I think he was from Croatia. Went 10-day bender, just went off on one. I think he bought like a whole bar of drinks. Um, Djokovic seems a bit more cold, aloof, um, ruthless in a sense. He's also just doesn't seem a lovable character. You can see he's driven, whereas a player like Goran Ivanisevic, he was just hilarious. He had a great sense of humour, very affable, relaxed, not necessarily like ripped. He had a bit of a dad bod, I think, when he won his last title, and he won with complete difference. He was. I love Gordon Ivanisevic. I would love to interview him. He probably would turn up with a cigar in one hand and the vodka in the other. Double, obviously. Neat. Uh, but Goran Ivanisevic sums up the joy of sport because same with Andre Agassi was a bit more controversial because there was apparently some doping and stuff, but Nadal, that bad boy image, but kind of like fun. Kyrgios has got that. I loved Mark Philippoussis, fantastic player. Andy Roddick was just that bang, just power. But they were more likable. People actually enjoyed watching them play because they, off the court, they were very relaxed and interviews, had a good sense of humour. Were just seen as normal people. Oh, Safin, he was hilarious. Lunatic. You need characters like that where you know this is where I think Nick Kyrgios is the wrong type of character. But England's rugby crisis, yes, I've discussed it earlier, but yeah, right, England and Wales are in serious trouble. Australia's in trouble as well. Rugby union, we discussed should it have gone professional, stayed amateur. I think we can debate that to death. But I think there's obviously issues with the club game. We know that. Finances. There are problems. I think some of these rule changes they brought in on the tackle area are going to cause more problems than solutions. I think they've been very reactive. Leighton Hewitt, I like Leighton Hewitt. Again, injuries. Leighton Hewitt injuries destroyed his career. Andy Roddick injuries. These were players who could and probably should have won more. But injuries did cause them and hampered them. But Leighton Hewitt was a great player. I think underrated player. He could be a bit aggressive, but and a bit short, hot-tempered at times. But overall, I think quite a likable human being. I don't mind him. Australia's come up with some great characters in sport, which you think at the time I don't like him, but actually when you hear them interviewed and post playing, actually he's kind of a bit of a larrikin. I kind of like him now. Lendl and Roddick, you could argue that. I think Roddick better on the hard courts of Australia and the US because of his playing style. Lendl, oh, he's a controversial character. He was Andy Murray's coach, obviously, at one point during Murray's peak years. Lendl, bit of a controversial character for reasons that Djokovic is. He's very similar to Djokovic. I mean, Boris Becker was quite lovable, and he's German. He's probably Britain's favourite German, apart from after Jurgen Klinsmann. But obviously, his off court dramas, legal dramas. Yeah, Boris Becker is a bit of a controversial character for his private life, but he was a very likable champion when he comes along. It's not often we talk about tennis, is it? It's sometimes nice to talk about those sports we don't talk about often. So tennis it's nice to talk about tennis once in a while. But it's been a while since we've really dug into it and look at the characters of the sport. It is kind of nice occasionally to go, bang, let's talk about sport. I mean, look, I think tennis does have its issues, and I think what I would say the golden era of tennis was the 90s and the 2000s. I think that was a good time to be a tennis fan. Because the characters we are discussing, the Ivanisevics, the Roddicks, the Philippoussis, Agassi, um, Boris Becker comes into his own as a commentator and as an expert. And apart from his private life and his legal issues and his financial problems, quite a likable character. A German with a sense of humour. It's ridiculous. Who knew? Um, but I do think tennis, unfortunately, much like snooker, much like cricket and other sports, does have its corruption issues, does have its financial problems. And so possibly, it does have issues with match fixing and spot fixing. There are problems there. The lower levels of the game, that there are structural issues with the sport. It is seen as a very elitist sport as well, similar to golf. It's got that stereotype that you've got to be from an upper middle class background to play, which again is not the case. The Murray brothers, both Jamie and Andy Murray, proved that. You can come from a very humble background and make it to the top level. I would argue that it's very similar to golf in many aspects, but I mean, it does have its differences, but similarities, yes. I think there's more money in golf, and the championships, the big majors, are more evenly spread around players. Whereas in tennis, a handful of players have dominated. Whereas in golf, multiple players seem to win the various majors, like at Augusta, the PGA, the Open. Multiple players seem to have. Some players do really well at playing at the Open because other players seem to have a lot of success at the Masters. Is the playing conditions. Augusta National in Georgia. The weather's that time of year, it's post hurricane season, and while the rest of the US is shivering its tits off, that part of the southeast of the US is actually quite warm and mild. The Open, I mean, look, the UK, look at this summer. Summer's been all over the place. The whole 4 days used to be unmissable viewing for me, and then the BBC screwed up its agreement with the broadcasting rights for it. Now unfortunately I just don't care anymore. It used to be an almost religious event, and what is interesting is my dad was never a golf fan, not really. Never got my dad was never a golf fan. And I think out of our household, I'm the only. golf fan I think there is. My golf I never remember my dad ever being majorly interested, ever. Um, and after my parents separated and divorced, he would still come and have his, weekend visits, and we would go up to my dad's and all that. If the golf was on the TV, he wouldn't watch it. It wasn't his thing. It wasn't a team sport. There's the simple fact, it was not a team sport. The only individual, um, kind of sports that we would watch would be the World's Strongest Man and Britain's Strongest Man, the strongman competitions. Other than that, it wasn't really, um my dad was into, like, his rugby league, his rugby union, his football. My dad loved his team sports. He loved his motorsport. Again, there's that team aspect where it's not just the driver or drivers. You might have two, three drivers in a team or a single driver team. The whole because there's that team aspect. And I think that's partly because of his army career. You're part of a unit. You're part of a team. You're part of a platoon, a squad, that kind of thing. And my dad did obviously play sports in the army and before his time in the army. So that team aspect, I think, uh, because of being a member of the services, service personnel, and his youth playing team sport in the army, playing team sports. I think that had a bearing. I never remember my dad really being into individual sports that I can remember, apart from boxing. He liked boxing, but he wasn't a big tennis fan. He wasn't a big golf fan. Didn't really watch snooker. I can't remember my dad ever watching golf, tennis, or snooker or darts. I just cannot remember it. It's not something that with my dad, it was always the team sport, always. And in motorsport, because you have that team support team dynamic with the pit crew, with a teammate possibly, mechanics, the chief engineer, that kind of thing. Because of my dad's army background, I don't think he did really. Not I never remember, and this is the weird thing. This is where I think I differ from my dad to a certain aspect. Is I when do I think? I would say the 90s, 2000s. I would say the 2000s, I think, would be about right. I've really gone off snooker and darts completely. You won't see me watch snooker or darts now. Gone off it. Again, saturation. There's too many events now. I think snooker and darts very very similar to golf and tennis. They're that individualistic sport where the players are reliant on the prize money, and it's constant. There's no break. It's constant. You've got to go to as many events as possible to earn the money. There is no off season. It's constant. These individual sports, it is constant. There's no real off season. You're always on the move. You're always traveling, which does have an impact on the players. I would say it's the home factor, yes, but it does have an impact on the players because you need that work-life balance, and this is what you find um, with team sports is there's a thing called an off-season and a pre-season where you may be training, but you're not actually bashing your body up. You have that downtime, you have that family time, you have that personal time away. You have mid-season breaks, you have bye weeks where certain leagues and certain sports you get a bye round, so you're allowed some downtime. Head coach will go, "I can have 2, 3 days off. You can have a long weekend. You can spend time with the friends and family. Come back, we'll have some light training. It's voluntary training." Whereas in things like snooker, darts, golf, tennis, it's every week tournament. Got to play every other week. Got to play. Don't get that family time, that personal time, that off time. Basically, it is constant. It is constant. And again, if you're a mid-ranking or lower-ranking player, you've got to go to as many tournaments as possible and compete in as many tournaments as possible to get that prize money to the next tournament. And you're living your life on the road. Um, Again, I haven't watched darts for many years now. Many years now. Well, it's got the World Championship phrase in it, so that's going to instantly draw in the North American fans, those casual sports fans. You go, "What's this?" and they hear World Championship, and suddenly, well, we've got to have a player who's good enough. We've got to develop players. As soon as you put World Championship or World Cup into a sport, the US goes, well, we've got to have a team or players in that competition. We've got to develop our player base. We've got to host this tournament. We've got to invest in this tournament. We've got to invest in this. As soon as you mention world, the Americans think they're the best at it, or they've got to be the best at it. They've got to be the best at everything. And there is potential of certain sports to really crack the. If you can crack the US market, Asia will follow immediately. If you can crack the US sports market and make some money out of North America, especially the US, Asia will go, we'll buy that, we'll get involved. As soon as if you've got a World Cup or a World Championships in any sport, the Americans want to win and they want to be the best at it. The issue is darts and snooker, they're individualistic sports. So you've already got your tennis and your golf, where the US have multiple champions in those sports, in various, got the Ryder Cup and all that, and the Davis Cup, where they've won a lot. They've got a lot of championship winners, a lot of success. And there's those and the NCAA. There's a golf NCAA program. There's a tennis NCAA program. So they already have successful athletes in those sports. But this is where sports like rugby league, like rugby union, cricket. We have World Cups and World Championships, and at the age levels, we have World Cups in these sports. The US hasn't won them yet. We haven't. The US hasn't won in those sports yet. They want to, and I think this is where the NRL taking rugby league to the US. I think because of the success of rugby union and the fact that the US will be hosting the men's and women's rugby union World Cups in a few years' time, well, about a decade's time, that's suddenly going to change the conversation. And cricket, they're getting interested in cricket now, partly because of the West Indian influence in certain parts of the US and the NCAA system. And also they're obsessed with anything British. So there's that, and it's a British sport. And they're obsessed. But anything we do, they're obsessed. And when they see that there's a World Cup in this sport, we've got to get a team together. We've got to win this. The fact that they're useless at a lot of these international sports is hilarious, but they've got to compete. They've got to win. I did. Again, this debate is continuing. I think there needs to be a common sense approach. Common sense left the room a long time ago. Honestly, sports governance and common sense don't go together at all. So it's common sense and just common sense left the chat about 20 years ago. There needs to be a common sense approach. That player is going to drill every ball 4 and 6 easily, clear the boundary. Because in the women's game, the boundary is shorter, the pace of bowling is less, and if you've got a powerful batter, that's going for 6. There's going to be some ridiculous scoring, and then that completely undermines women's sport. Where I can't remember which sport it was. Was it cycling or swimming? So there needs to be a trans category, and I think it was the other week. There needs, as I say, common sense approach, but sports governance and common sense, they're rarely used in the same sentence. But common sense. I mean, I remember that there was a congressional hearing, and I think, well, I forget which US university program it was, but it was the women's swim team, and their testimony, because they elected one of their swimmers to go in front of this hearing, one of the female student swimmers, and this is the whole program. So you can speak for us, and it was it was stunning and quite shocking and disturbing what she had to say, and it's a small minority of the LGBTQ community that get up in arms about this and are pushing for this, you know, which I do, which the radical left, like this is where I try and keep politics off. The radical left has a great way of infighting with itself, and then what I would call the I wouldn't say the far right, but the hard right, the alternative right as it's known now, or the, the right of centre, the more hardline right wingers start playing the culture wars because the left wing, the hard left, do what they do. And we're not talking about Marxists here because they really don't believe in human rights. We're talking about that end of the left wing political spectrum. Um, is it common sense or being scared of saying no? It's the fear of you know uh, social media. This is where social media has completely distorted the conversation. And of course, I'm using a social media platform to discuss this conversation because of this issue, because someone has asked the question about it. Common sense needs to be applied. We need to have a transgender category for these people. Um, they need to be accepted in society, of course. They need a safe place to practice their sport and feel safe and included. Then give them their own category and allow them to express themselves in their own category safely. Um, with the support of their friends, their fans, and their family. Obviously, like it, there's a reason why we have a lack of gay male athletes at the top level in a lot of sports, and part of it is to do with the, the nature of a lot of fan bases, and of course that tribal nature of fan bases, that aggressive nature of fan bases, and also the toxic nature within sport. And I watched an AFL, well, a Four Corners episode on the AFL, and its lack of openly gay players in the men's game or bisexual players. And yeah, at the lower levels, at the semi-pro amateur levels, yes, there have been a handful of openly gay players. But at the senior level, they're, they're terrified of putting their head above the parapet. Look, I think the reason why there isn't a transgender category in sport is it doesn't make any money. If the women's categories are struggling to make money in a lot of sports, not all, but are struggling to be financially profitable, sports and their governing bodies, their sponsors, obviously, the teams, it is a business. It's got to be profitable. Look at the sports teams and leagues that are struggling financially. I think it's a financial reason why there's been a lack of investment in women's sport in certain sports and certain leagues until more recently, and why I think there is a financial reason behind it, an economic reason behind it. Um, it's not going to make any money. You'll have that novelty impact unless you properly subsidise it through the men's professional leagues and professional teams, which is what they're doing in the NRL, which is what they're doing with the English European football clubs with the women's arm, which is what they're doing with the NBA with women's NBA, unless you have that financial support and guidance from the men's league, it's never going to be sustainable. Yes, I think the popularity was going up anyway. There's of course those idiots on social media who leave their comments saying they belong in the kitchen, get the ironing done, and it's just constant sexist comments. Most of these idiots with a keyboard haven't had a kick about since they were like 15 years old. They're fat, middle-aged men who haven't seen the end of their dick since they were 25. Um, and, a lot of them, well, you can debate whether they're particularly nice husbands and fathers to their wives and daughters, really. But they're the type of ones who expect their daughter home by 10, otherwise they're battering the boyfriend or whatever. They are what I call the oiks and the ugs of the world, the cavemen. They are. I think they get a loud voice because the social media companies like controversy, because it creates clicks, because it creates um, site traffic for the algorithm, and then the advertisers, the money's there. But it's true. Um, this is why there's a lack of action over the controversial, people like Andrew Tate. Because it's controversial, it creates clicks. Mainstream media were doing it for years. Look at the newspaper headlines. Look at 24-hour news channels. The way they word their headlines makes it, the way with talk shows, controversy sells. Clickbait is, I hate clickbait articles. I hate clickbait videos. This is why I don't do transfer speculation. When you hear that a player has been suspended, go like the player's been suspended. What happens? He hasn't lost his job. He's suspended. But it's not clickbait. We know he's suspended. We know there's an investigation. Talk about Mason Greenwood or Paul Kent with NRL 360 with his legal issues. Okay, this is what's happened. These are the facts we know. This is what's going to happen with court dates and charges. Oh, look, Piers Morgan is a twat. Yes, I don't like Piers Morgan. The snippets of him, destroying the liberal left are quite funny because that's a few times. Occasionally, he talks common sense, which, as I say, has left the room. But this is a guy who just walked off, uh, you know, the set and had a huff and fired himself. Piers Morgan he does. He's obsessed with Cristiano Ronaldo to the point of, I think that's a bit of more than a man crush. Maybe they're having a secret, love affair. But jokes aside, for an Arsenal fan, you know, he is obsessed. Or he claims he's an Arsenal fan. Not that I think Arsenal want him as a celebrity fan. Let me make that clear. I think they'd be like, why is this guy is not representative of our fan base? That it wasn't really an interview. It was more of him salivating over the fact he's got Ronaldo in the same room as him, and he probably had a nice raging hard on for the first time in like 20 years. But Piers Morgan likes, his Piers Morgan live stories on ITV. Some of the people every guest he's had on there, he has smeared, hacked their phones, and printed lies about them as a journalist. He has slagged them off, and he's destroyed their private lives. That's why the Freddie Flintoff interview he did on his life stories was cringeworthy. It made the Ronaldo one actually look quite nice. But Freddie Flintoff, met him in person, not a nice person, actually, to be brutally honest. Freddie Flintoff is not the fun, lovable character you see on Top Gear and you see on his, some of the. Freddie Flintoff comes across as an absolute moron. He's not a particularly nice individual at all. There's a lot of these sports stars are not particularly, especially the big, superstar kind of players. A pisshead, and I wouldn't call him a lovable rogue. I would say he's a bit of a knob. So Flintoff, I didn't come across as a particularly humble. He wasn't a particularly nice individual. But that's my personal view. Other people may have thought, well, he was great signing autographs or whatever. He didn't come across as a particularly likable individual. At the same time, the treatment he had in the press was also deplorable. And we can argue the pros and cons of his treatment by the tabloids when he had his issues with the peddler incident, the breakdown of his first marriage. We can debate that. I think he's yeah. I would say he's a bit egotistical. I wouldn't say he's. Oh God, the Giacomo adverts, they were painful. He is a big chap, though. I wouldn't want to argue with him on a Friday night to say that. I would be not looking. I'll be looking the worse for wear the following morning when I wake up in A&E with a fractured skull. But he's massive. He's a big bloke. There's a reason why he was a bowling all-rounder. He's a really big bloke. He's 6 foot. Is he 6'5"? I'm gonna have to look at his stats. He's either 6'4", 6'5". He's quite tall. Yeah, he's not a small man. You could see him playing rugby league or rugby union easily. You could see him playing a contact team sport easily. You could see him as like a lower division, maybe National League centre back. He's a sizable unit. And for his size, yes, he is reasonably mobile. If you think about it, for his size, I would say that Tyson Fury, when Freddie Flintoff was at his biggest, when he was weight wise, he's a slightly smaller version of Tyson Fury. That's the best way I could describe Freddie Flintoff. A slightly smaller version of Tyson Fury. He's a sizable chap. He's not. You can see where he got his his hitting power with the bat and his bowling speed with the ball. Um, there's a lot of force behind it. You can see why he was such a destructive batsman on his day, but you can also see why he had all his knee and ankle problems with the force that's going through his body. A lot of cricketers, I've heard a lot of stories about a lot of cricketers not being particularly likable and nice individuals. Um, that's not just me saying that. I've had a lot of stories about cricketers coming across as not particularly um, pleasant, pleasant individuals, um, and a lot of it's to do with the drinking culture. He is from Lancashire. He's a Lancashire boy. Uh, Probably why he got on so well with Jimmy Anderson in the early days. Yeah, Jimmy Anderson's still playing. Let that sink in. Freddie Flintoff is not playing. Jimmy Anderson is because Jimmy Anderson's knocked the drink on the head. Still has a belly every now and then, but Ian Botham is horrible. Really not nice. There's a lot of people come out and say Ian Botham is a really dislikable individual. Um, Even at the time, at his peak in the 80s, he was very controversial. Um, he even played football for Scunthorpe for a while. I think his son plays rugby union for Wales. Yeah, the stories date back to the 80s about both of them. Jeffrey Boycott's not particularly pleasant. Um, there, there are a lot of cricket seems to have this issue where a lot of the players are quite nasty individuals. Um, we've heard allegations about Michael Vaughan. Well, Simon Jordan. Are we talking about Simon Jordan on Talksport? Because I think there's a Simon Jordan cricketer as well. Um, well, on Talksport, he comes across as a bit of he's an opinionated individual. I wouldn't say he's dislikable or likable because I've never met Simon Jordan. I've never met a club owner. Um, I've obviously met people involved in football and players and coaches and scouts, but I've never met Simon Jordan personally. He does seem a bit confrontational, but I wouldn't say he's a dislikable individual. He has his opinions and he has his views on things, and he sticks by his guns. I wouldn't say he has his convictions. Um, I could see myself going head to head on a few issues there and having my opinions. No, I would say I wouldn't mind meeting Simon Jordan and actually going head to head and debating him on a few points because I do think while I come from more of a laid back, casual point of view, and I will admit, yeah, sports finance, I it's a murky area that he knows very very well, and he will school me on those points on the economics. But I would say this: clearly, the economics aren't working because it's a false economy. And I think he knows that. Dale Vince, he's going to destroy Forest Green Rovers. I mean, look, for a small club, they've done very, very well. For a sort of a cult club to support, they've done very well. But I don't agree with the plan he has for that club going forward. It will be ruinous for them. Um, I can't see that club actually making much money as things currently stand. They need to invest in their current stadium, not build a new one. It'll be beneficial for them in the long run. Dale Vince, along with a lot of club owners, don't seem to be particularly nice individuals either. And I don't think they do have the club's best interests at heart about making money. Sports team owners aren't particularly, I mean, you get this in North America as well. Sports team owners, a lot of them aren't particularly nice people. And they don't have the interests of they're in it to make money. And how they make that money is how they make their money. But no, I would. Simon Jordan though is an interesting character because he's not a club owner now; he's a journalist now. But he does come across as a bit of an arrogant so and so. But at the same time, I think he's more bearable than Piers Morgan. Um, he doesn't, unlike Piers Morgan, smear people and make false allegations. And I wouldn't say he's spiteful in that way. I think he's just very stubborn, sticks to his guns, even if he may be wrong, and can be a bit argumentative. But I think it'd be kind of fun going head to head with a Simon Jordan if they were to do like a fan, a fans corner where they did a segment where they got a fan on the radio on the show, like a fans corner hour or something. Because I think Talksport is too heavily focused on the boxing and the football. I think there's a bit more scope with the radio network to get more sports on there. There's some big sporting stories. Forest Green is like that kind of club you can make a Lego toy for. You could actually do their stadium as a Lego toy. That'd be fantastic. But there's a few stadiums which, like Plough Lane, for example, is perfect for like Lego kind of pitch, film stands. You could do. Northwich Victoria, I remember had a you could do as well. Blythe Spartan. Some of these smaller grounds you can make like a Lego model out of or something. Jason Cundy, not many thoughts on that. To be honest, my favourites are Simon Jordan. I do watch the site. I watch his snippets because he is controversial in the sense that he's a bit argumentative. But actually, I'm agreeing with Simon Jordan more and more as the weeks go on, which is disturbing. I never thought I would say that. I don't have enough of a viewpoint on Jason Cundy personally. Um, I that's my personal view on that. But I do think talk radio, which is what Talksport is, much like LBC, you get the parallels. You get controversial people going head to head, co-hosting and discussion. Um, of course, Talksport. Laura Woods has left. That's interesting. A lot of Talksport fans rejoiced at that. A lot of them were like, well, actually, I think I don't mind Laura Woods. I think Goldstein, he's annoying. He's just how has he got a job on the radio? He comes across as trying to be like, I'm matey, I'm one of the lads. In reality, it's painful listening. Um, I'd much rather have like Ian Wright doing it, because Ian Wright knows his stuff and he is a proper football fan. Goldstein's painful. Um, how he's got the but this is what the owners of Talksport want. They want us to talk about the controversies in this because it's clickbait. It gets clicks. I don't know. Um, I have a rough idea, but I don't know. Connections, possibly knowing the right people, going to college or university or school with the right people, having friends in the. How he's made he's stolen a living, but hey, if he's got the right agent and he's got the right connections, it's not what you know, it's who you know. Sometimes you don't have to. I mean, look at sports administration. You don't have to be good at your job. You just got to know the right guy to get into the organisation, to get into a position of authority. Really, it's how management works. It's not what you know, it's who you know. I've got some jobs because I've known some people. Admittedly, the industries I've worked in are radio, or broadcasting, or TV, but it's not what you know, it's who you know. His voice is dull. Was worse years ago. It's not that. I think he just comes across as a bit of a moron, really. Um, but he's got his role. Talksport paying him money. He's got his show slot. Obviously, enough listeners and those viewers on YouTube um, are watching and listening, and obviously they obviously have to have the ex players on there. Obviously, and again, it's not what you know, it's who you know. I think O'Hara is a pretty good ex player to have on there. Martin Keown's all right. I think Dean Ashton was quite good. Um, Andy Townsend and Ali McCoy do quite well as ex-players. Obviously, Alan Brazil, obviously, is the famous one with Talk Sports. There's a couple of ex-players and managers, Martin O'Neill, for example, who I think Um, obviously, do quite. David Ginola for me is, I think, was underrated as a sports pundit. David Ginola, I love him. Um, but obviously, we've lost Gianluca Vialli. I mean, Vialli, such a lovable human being, really. You hear the stories of Gianluca Vialli. Um, it's amazing the impact he had not only in Italian football but English football, and how he was adopted as an adopted Londoner, as an adopted Englishman, as an adopted Brit. The way Vialli came across, and having met him as a kid, he was so patient with with fans. Even if you weren't a Chelsea fan, he was patient. And you listen to some of his interviews where they talk about his youth, getting into the sport, the support from his family, his background, his playing days, his managerial days. Um, I think if they don't concede, they won't lose the game. Michael, some of them, some of the quotes that commentators and pundits use are hilarious. But look, obviously, what people forget is most professional athletes aren't necessarily academically gifted. They're not stupid people. They're not academically gifted. They're not articulate. But there is no doubt that your Wayne Rooney's, your Michael Owens, your David Beckhams are actually very intelligent people. Um, and I think the stereotype is out there. They're all thick. They're not. They're from working class backgrounds. So they're from and you know, an escape for them from a drudgery of a working class to private background is sport, and that gave them a very very good career, some good earnings, and made them very wealthy people, and gave them an opportunity in life they otherwise wouldn't have had. So I wouldn't knock them for that, but the way the media portrays them and then getting them. Sometimes you've got a face for TV and you've got a voice for radio. Sometimes you've got a voice for radio, but you haven't actually got the intelligence for it in the sense of academic, articulate. But you've got the intelligence about the sport. You know what tactically you're talking about. But I think, oh god, the first, oh that yeah didn't sell very well. Bit of a commercial flop. Was a terrible game anyway. But yeah, this is at bearing in mind this is at a time when you had Pro Evo, UEFA Striker, the early FIFA games. You had This Is Soccer, This Is Football, depending where you were in the world. There was a lot of video games coming out at the time, and of course, obviously, fast forward 2 decades. Um, obviously, EA Sports is obviously it's had its issues. You've got Pro Evo still, and you've got the 2K series. So the more successful ones survived, partly because of the video games publishers and the create and the video game studios. It's a dog eat dog world. The big studios buy up the smaller ones, and the smaller startups they tend to be flash in the pan. It's a very competitive industry. But yeah, the Michael Owens World League Soccer, yeah, that didn't last very long, did it? But he was this teen superstar. He bursts onto the scene very, very young. That fantastic World Cup '98. The FA Cup wins with Liverpool. But it was, yeah. But this is at a time when video games. Then I mean, I'm half tempted to dig the old PlayStation now, plug it into the TV, and play UEFA Striker, which back in its day was a fantastic game. Now looking at it, I mean, Christ, it is clunky, pixel. It is dated, but you've got to remember what kind of we're talking about 32-bit graphics, you know. But you look at video games now and the technology and how it's evolved and the graphics and the gameplay and the development that goes in, how much they cost. But yeah, it was a commercial flop. I even forgot he actually made it, to be honest. Um, but apart from a couple of sports titles, sports video games um, weren't really a thing for me. Uh, I was more into the racing games and things like the Bond games and Call of Duty. For me, the FIFA titles and the Pro Evo titles. Pro Evo I enjoyed playing it more. I thought the game I found it was a more enjoyable playing experience. Um, but strategy games like Red Alert, Command and Conquer, the Command and Conquer series, the Total War series of games, I enjoyed more. Just personal preference. Um, and then you get the Gears of War and your Call of Duties and your Medal of Honors and games like that. Open world like Skyrim's. But no, there are some games that are so bad that you look back on them and they are collector's items. But it wasn't a great game. It didn't have it was a commercial failure. Um, and there's a reason why a lot of people don't even realise it was a game. It was badly promoted as well. And at a time when you've got all these various video games like the rise of PlayStation, Sega, and you had N64, and was suddenly becoming a very popular thing. It was a very affordable thing. People's salaries went up in the 90s, and the next console release, every kid's got to have it. They had the marketing. It was badly marketed. You have FIFA 22 for the PC, first and FIFA 04. It's not bad, but honestly, I haven't lost my love for the video game industry. I haven't grown out of it. I just look at the state of the industry now. And for me, there's nothing on release right now. I have no interest in it anymore, really. Um, and I look at the I look at EA Sports, which is a subsidiary of EA Games, and the commercial dispute with FIFA that ultimately ended a very successful agreement for both parties. I don't know why they shot themselves in the foot, but they did. That was the most successful one of the most successful video game franchises of all time, and they shot themselves in the foot. They've had 2 decades of dominance of the football game market, really, of that particular niche. They have It's one of the most successful franchises of all time, and they shot themselves in the foot. Um, and the relationship, I where if let's say the new relationship between 2K games and FIFA isn't as successful or it doesn't work, okay, then we can look at potentially Pro Evo being the next successful franchise. Although Pro Evo is a very, very successful franchise anyway. But there have been a lot of football games, video games over the years, as I said, and only a handful have made it. But then you've got Football Manager, then you've got Championship Manager. Um, it it's going to be interesting to see how over the next couple of years, if FIFA goes, well, the video game market's run its course for us, um, or do they circle back to EA Sports and try and renegotiate a new deal? EA Sports, you know, they've had cricket, they've had rugby, they've had golf, and again, the relationship seems to break down with a lot of sports. You've got the NHL, you've got Madden, but the NBA is on 2K. It's more successful on 2K. So EA Sports, I think there's only a couple more major leagues out there, or major sports that you know, the relationship may break down there, and 2K Games is rivaling them now with a lot of sports leagues and sports video games. And you do have those other game publishers that do make rival. It's an interesting one, but They've become very dominant in that sector of the video game market. But sporting video games are limited in what you can do. in regards to, yeah, the graphics can only get so good and the gameplay can only get so good. And there comes a point where you've reached that plateau, and I think a lot of people are saying the game isn't great. It's There's only so far you can take it with the current video game console and PC technology that there is, unless you go full VR, which would be ridiculous. And for me, I fell out of love with it a long time ago. I haven't purchased a FIFA game for a very, very long time. It, yeah, but it's the same with the Call of Duty. It's the same. Medal of Honor went down with EA games had Medal of Honor. Then they had Battlefield. They're had their issues with their online servers and all sorts of things. So there's a point where you go, we can only take this so far. Um, yeah, no, you don't pay full price. You can find them cheaper alternatives. Yes, obviously. Um, but as I say, at the same time, there's only so far you can take. There's a limit with the technology. I will say this though, because of the video game market, sports have used now that digital aspect in regards to looking at analytics. Um, looking at various things, and it has had an interesting impact on professional sport, and getting the technical aspects of professional sport in regards to video review, and also when a player is having issues with injury, using um, data analysts and graphically, putting him on and going, this is your style of running, or your running mechanics, tackling mechanics. Um, so the video game industry's had an impact on sports recovery, sports science, data collection, a whole range of things. This is where esports comes in. And now I think we've overdone it now with sports science, sports psychology, and I think we're overcoaching players. Um, yeah, no, I don't. As I say, I don't religiously game. I casually game when I use the game. I play because I enjoy playing, not because I got a bit competitive, but I enjoy playing. I video game back in the day to have fun, and then you've got the e-game teams now, and the e-gamers, and that aspect. I've got to look into e-gaming as because it's getting to the levels of professional sporting levels with money involved and the audiences involved. Um, and some people have made a lot of money playing video games. It's true. A lot of people have made a lot of money, and they get a lot of sponsorship. There's a lot of interest. There's TV deals. There's social media deals. There's streaming deals online. Um, there's some people who made a lot of money out of e-gaming, and it is definitely something to consider for the future. Um, we'll see what happens. It's been a it's been a commercial success for FIFA. It's definitely grown the brand in North America and Asia, which has brought a lot more money uh, and revenues in, and bigger TV audience. Sponsors have got on board from around the world. So in that regard, it's been a commercial success. It has made a lot of money. It has definitely helped grow the game globally, as in the actual sport on a global level. There's a reason why the US is going to be hosting being a co-host for its second World Cup. There's a reason why the interest from the US market into the European leagues is there. And I think the FIFA game series and the Pro Evo series and the 2K series and these various other video games, sporting video games, have definitely had an impact on the interest. Because when I do my club history videos, for example, I've had American viewers saying that they discovered a certain club through FIFA, or their interest was raised because it was a video game, and then they actually and they actually learned about the European leagues because of FIFA, and they found a certain club name interesting, and and then they realise how it the cultural impact and the social impact that professional football has in Europe and South America for that matter. What the Vanarama, the National League, the former conference. There's so many ex-football league clubs that have been on FIFA, obviously, that are in the conference, well, the National League right now. Um, and to be honest, because of the Wrexham story, and because Notts County were a non-league side for a while, that's definitely raised the interest in non-league football, and not just in the UK. And of course, EA Games, which owns EA Sports, is an American company. So there is definitely a growing interest in the lower leagues now and the non-league now because of what obviously Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney's ownership of Wrexham. Um, and oh, what football club did um, American football? Oh, Jesus, Tom Brady's bought a football club as well now. Birmingham City he's invested in. So there's definitely the acknowledgement of the lower leagues outside the Premier League and to a certain extent the Championship with with the North American fans, including celebrity fans or those who played other sports who've got money. There's definitely an acknowledgement, and because EA Games, which obviously EA Sports is their sports video game arm, are American, and they make a lot of money with sales of FIFA predominantly in Europe and obviously in the UK, obviously, and when you're getting this feedback from consumers of the products, it's a no-brainer to look into it, obviously. But and the National League's a professional league setup, so as I say, I think the Wrexham side of things has definitely increased the interest in the non-league, um, and there's no doubt that the Netflix or Amazon series was. I mean, look at Sunderland Till I Die. I mean, that's really. I believe it's American. Actually, yeah, but I think it might because Rockstar is British, but has a lot of its offices and studios in the US. Um, I it's Canadian. Wouldn't surprise me because of the NHL series that they have. I know Rockstar have some studios and offices in Canada, but I believe it's US. I know it's brought British um, uh, uh, video and European um, video game companies and distributors as well. Let's have a look. California, Redwood City. It was founded by Trip Hawkins, who used to work for Apple, and it used to the home PC. Trip Hawkins. Uh, no, California. California. It's a US company. I knew that. I knew that. It used to have an office in Guildford down the road from me. Its UK headquarters was in Guildford. I think it was its European headquarters at one point as well. Um, so yeah, there's that. EA Sports and yeah, the old EA Sports entrance. EA Sports is in the game. Uh, yeah, that's iconic. EA Sports is in the game. Um, no, it doesn't really. The latest edition, which would have been FIFA 24, there is no real difference. Um, It's just a rebranding of the name. I've seen a couple of adverts for it now. Um, Not really interested in purchasing it or playing it, to be honest. There's no interest from me in regards to playing it, purchasing it, um, at all. But as I say, like, I haven't fallen out of love with video gaming. I haven't grown out of it. I'm just really at a point now where I'm looking at the industry and what's available and the pricing of a lot of, and I'm like, that's not worth the money. And they're selling an incomplete game where you've got to go buy the add-ons, wait for downloads. The microtransactions are really off-putting as well. Um, but yeah, as I say, there's only a couple of game titles I'm actually actively looking forward to playing. Um, if and when GTA 6 ever gets released, I might purchase that. Next Gears of War, I might purchase that. But no, I played Madden, never enjoyed it. Not a massive fan of Madden. Um, um, I understand why Madden, is very popular in the US and Canada, absolutely, but I never enjoyed it. No, there's no doubt it is a good game, but for me, I'm playing it. It's not my type of game, but I appreciate that they do get Madden, I think, right. Um, I wouldn't disagree with that. I think I think the NHL games, I think they used to get right. I think there's only so far you can take a sports game, really, with the current tech. There's only so far you can do it. Um, but the price they're asking for people to pay at a time when it's the same with ticket prices and it's the same with merchandise prices. I mean, teams and leagues have been criticised for the price of replica jerseys and authentic replicas. Um, um, and I was looking at the NHL store yesterday or the day before. I was looking at it, and Adidas this is the last year Adidas will be selling the authentic replicas, and they're still over £200, and there's not enough of them left in stock. The Fanatics are cheaper, but I'm not buying the Fanatics. Not good enough. And of course, from next season, as in 2024-2025, Fanatics will be making the on ice product as well. And it's that has met with a very negative reaction both in the US and Canada and overseas, over here in Europe. So I won't be paying the price. I probably will wait for this time next year to get my NHL Adidas gear if they've got anything left that hasn't been sold. Um, there's only a couple of teams that I want to buy Adidas Authentics for. I would love to collect the whole league, absolutely. I cannot afford the money that they are asking for. Um, so, I mean, I could have got the last reverse retro the Jets did, and that's a really I'm like a lot of fans who went. That is not there's a reason why that actually was cheaper than a standard authentic the white away jersey. The reverse retro was cheaper than the current um, away white jersey that the Jets have, and I'm thinking they've really got a lot of them left in stock. They did not sell. Um, but no, I don't have the money to pay. As I said when I did the sports memorabilia video about cost saving, I'm going to wait until next summer before I even attempt to buy an Adidas jersey. There is no point. They're still too expensive. Next year, if they still have them on the NHL shop next August or July, I'm buying one. The prices will drop. Um, I've looked at some of the NRL jerseys as well. We've seen teams, already wearing next season's jersey as what it's going to look like in game. I know the Sea Eagles did it the other week, and their new jersey looks good. Um, yeah, well, I don't mind the retro kits. Certain manufacturers will do them as a modern version of the retro, as in they will re-release for sale. Uh, and then you've got the original kit that was bought in the 90s or the 2000s, which are going second hand, and they're the ones that are expensive. But when they do the limited edition rerun, which isn't the actual current season's kit, but the retro one, they only do a limited run. They only sell them for a year or two, and then they're gone. Um, and this is the thing, like Palmer obviously re-released and redesigned their goalkeeping kit for Buffon re-signing for the club. Pescara had their limited edition Dolphin third alternate, which they couldn't make quick enough because it kept non-Pescara fans in Italy were like, "That is really cool. That is a desirable kit." Partick had their, was it a home or away kit or third alternate? Um, that non-Partick fans bought in large numbers because it's collectible because it's that ugly. Apparently, it really was. Um, so manufacturers and clubs have realised that non-fans of their club will. There's a big thing now with jersey collecting, and those jerseys from the 90s. Have you? Some of the prices are absolutely obscene, and I follow some other YouTubers. I'm not the only one who have a jersey collection, and yeah, my jersey collection is tiny. Um, but yeah, when you've got Celtic, Rangers, and Aberdeen, their jersey design has basically not changed in 100 years. Other clubs have really had some funky, kept the same colours but changed the striping, or if it's quarters or halves or hoops, they've altered occasionally. Whereas Celtic and Rangers have stuck with their home colours. It's the away kit that seems to change. But for the most part, clubs like your Arsenals, your Man Uniteds, your Liverpool ain't going to change their kit. Other clubs have, like Southampton. Reading have actually had a sky blue, all blue, no hoops before in the I think it was the 60s or 70s. I've got a magazine which has got it in. Some clubs have come up with some design changes but kept the same colours, whereas other clubs have changed their colours. Like, and the fans have gone, what? Um, so yeah, yeah, Leeds United have had multiple crest changes and changes to their kit. Um, Other clubs haven't. Um, some rebrandings haven't gone down well, like Cardiff, for example. They very quickly changed back. God, that was Vincent Tan was a lunatic of an owner, which has led to a lot of the problems Cardiff have now. Is him. Um, but for the most part, clubs tend to stick with a similar design. Barcelona stick with the same colours, but they change how. Is it halves? Is it hoops? Is it stripes? Barcelona stick with the same colours. They just change the jersey design. So certain clubs, their design isn't going to change. Other clubs, they'll have the same colour scheme, but they'll change how the jersey looks. Um, Vincent Tan, he's a lunatic, quite literally. Absolute egotistical. He's a Bond villain. A lot of these team owners should not be team owners. The calls for more fan ownership or fan involvement and club memberships really, you know, this is the yeah. It's the same with the whole owner as well. When he's called instead of get rid of the city, call them whole tigers. Some of these owners really are out of step with the fan base and the community, and they don't have that connection, and that they come across as very, very megalomaniac-y. Crikey, if this was, the 1930s, they would make a very, very good megalomaniac of a dictator. Um, they really don't come across as really in touch and in step with the fans. There are some very eccentric owners, There are some very controversial owners, both domestic and overseas. There are some owners who really Ryan Reynolds and Macklin. They as soon as they put in a bid for the club, they met with community leaders. They met with fan representatives straight away, and they were like, "Educate us about what it means for this. What your club means to you, what you want us to do for this club, what the objectives you want us to achieve." That is something when they go, "Oh, this is a celebrity owner," they're going to get bored. They actually are actively invested with that part of East Central Wales. They are very, very connected with the community they have invested in, and they're in it for a long term. So, you know, this is where they actually come across as very, very reasonable, normal people. Todd Bowley, I think he's out of his. I don't think he's out of his depth. I just think because he's come from the aspect of the major leagues being franchise and the Dodgers ownership, he's come from a very different ownership model. Yes, I'd say with FSG with Liverpool and the Glazers with Man United, they run their clubs along American lines. They're seeing the commercial aspects and you know the tax write-off aspect. Um, but the issue is they don't have a relegation system in the US. It's a franchise model. The sporting culture is different. Um, Chelsea does struggle to make a profit. Ironically, they do struggle to make a profit. They always have. They've been beset by money issues for quite some time. Then that means you have to look at the internal structures of the club, how the club is structured off the field. I I think I think he's realised that Chelsea have got a lot of silverware. They have been very successful. Even before the Abramovich era, they won silverware. But there are issues with this club. I think he thinks the solution is to spend money. Um, because obviously he's a Major League Baseball owner, they don't have a salary cap, and again, you can throw money around in Major League Baseball. You can't do in the other major leagues because of salary cap constraints. Um, but he is running the club on a franchise American style. FSG have found out that we can't do that. Man United with the Glazers have found out you can't do that. Yet they still try and run it on the American model rather than the European model, and it doesn't work. It does not work. I think he needs to be better advised. He needs to get people around him from the European club aspect. Um, I don't think he's enamoured himself with the fan base. There's been a lot of it's been hectic, really. Um, Man City were more successful in their history than Chelsea were, although Chelsea since the 90s have had a lot of success before the Abramovich era. Um, but you could argue that the Abramovich era was a continuation of the Ken Bates era, really, where look at Bialy, they had success, they won silverware, they just won more with Abramovich. They, you know, it. You could argue Man City had a bigger gap with no success in the Premier League era. Chelsea have always been a Premier League club. Man City haven't. Um, although Chelsea, their early days, they were one of the most supported clubs in terms of average attendance, highest attendance, ranking quite highly in the attendance figures in the early days of professionalism. But that lack of success was quite telling. One league title, I think was it a League Cup or an FA Cup in there, and then suddenly the 90s comes along, and Premier League era, and the mid 90s comes along, and then they start winning a lot of stuff. But financially, they are troubled off the field, but they are a successful club on the field with the trophies they're bringing in. They get some Europe, I think was it Cup Winners' Cup, the UEFA Cup success. I think it was Cup Winners' Cup success. Bialy, player manager, successful as player and manager, the FA Cup success, the League Cup success. Then Abramovich comes along, and you get the Premier League success. Then you get the Champions League success and the Europa League success again, and they are constantly winning trophies and competing for trophies. And then, of course, the sanctions come in. You could see that Abramovich has been open to sell the club for several years. There are issues with the potential expansion of the stadium, and they're limited in what they can do in either moving stadium or staying where they are at Stamford Bridge. There are stadium issues that are going to be in the pipeline in the next 5 to 10 years. Ground sharing with Fulham, I don't think is an option because Craven Cottage, again, Fulham spent a lot of money expanding that stadium. Would that go down well with the fan base? They can't really share with Brentford either because Brentford, again, that won't go down with the fan base. So there are going to be issues in play for Chelsea that Man City don't have. Man City are going to be expanding the Etihad. Man City have also got the land around. They've got a lot of space. Chelsea are constrained by that part of West London. They're constrained geographically. There's going to be a stadium issue at some point. The Arsenal invincible team and conceding less goals like Chelsea. That's going to be interesting. Chelsea just sucked the life out of you. Chelsea didn't blow teams off the park either. There were some games they only won the 1-0. And Arsenal win a whole league season undefeated. So Chelsea lost a couple of games that season, but they really were a very good. Yeah, it was the football equivalent of playing the New Jersey Devils trap NHL. You suck the life out of the midfield, you congest it, and then you snatch a goal here, or you really frustrate the opposition by strangling the midfield and packing the midfield, and then obviously the opposition get frustrated, and that's how you get goals. They can't get through, they're stifled, but you also make sure you have some wingers who can attack with pace. So you congest the midfield and you have wingers coming in and wing backs. But it wasn't pretty football to watch, but it was effective. There's a reason why Mourinho's won as much silverware as he has. Yeah, it is very, very impressive, absolutely. But the thing is, when Abramovich buys the club, Chelsea had a very, very good team anyway. Um, they had a very, very good side, very good youth system anyway, and they had success in the years not long prior. They had been a very successful team, and there were still players involved with that Chelsea side that were part of the Vialli and Ruud Gullit sides of the 90s. So they had a very successful side anyway, and a very good team, and they just had the money issues off the field. That was the issue, is Chelsea weren't really didn't have good finances, but they had a good team, and they had good scouts and a good club scouting structure, and the playing side of things. Chelsea were brilliant, but Chelsea, weren't consistent enough in the league, and therefore they were seen as a cup team, of which they were very good in the various cup competitions. Hence why they got a fair bit of silverware, but they weren't consistent enough week to week in the league. They were too open defensively. So just a couple of signings changed the team. Ranieri basically laid the building blocks for Mourinho. Ironically, they were already on the way to being very good defensively and in the midfield under Ranieri. Very, very. They were already basically the core of the team. The team that Mourinho gets in his first couple of years, or his first season and a half, is the team Ranieri built. Why do I think he chose Chelsea not Fulham? Because Mohamed Al Fayed wasn't willing to sell at the time because he had not long purchased Fulham. That's why. That is the reason why. It's not that Fulham wouldn't have liked the investment. They had just been bought by Mohamed Al Fayed, and he had invested a lot of money into Fulham. That's the only reason. Honestly, that is the only reason why Abramovich chose Chelsea over. I think Abramovich was interested in either Manchester or Liverpool at one point as well. He wasn't. Chelsea, ironically, was a club that needed an owner. It needed investment. That's the ironic thing. Manchester United had talks with several potential investors, ultimately end up with the Glazers. Liverpool, always a big club, always made money. Gillette and Hicks ultimately buy the club, and then obviously FSG buy the club later on. But they had always solid fan base, never empty seats at Anfield. Always make money. Um, so and then you had Leeds as well, very well supported club. You had Newcastle. This is prior to Mike Ashley purchasing Newcastle. So there weren't that many options for a club for sale to invest in the UK, especially in England. But there's a and so Abramovich choosing Chelsea, it wasn't that there weren't other clubs that could be invested in. It was just Chelsea needed an owner, and he was the guy who came along at the time. It could have been Leeds. The reason why Fulham weren't bought by Abramovich is not long before Mohamed Al Fayed had just bought them and pumped money in and got them to the Premier League. So Fulham, there was no mood from Fulham fans to want Al Fayed out. And Mohamed Al Fayed at that time, obviously Harrods was making him a lot of money, was very, very wealthy, buys the football club. Fulham start making him a lot of money as well. No interest from Al Fayed to walk away from Fulham, and Fulham fans didn't want him to walk away. So that was a happy relationship. Leeds, I think, could have done with an Abramovich because obviously look at the mess that Leeds are in now. Basically, they're staying in the Premier League, back in the Premier League for sure. It took them a long time to get back there. Administrations, points deductions, transfer embargoes, financial collapse off the field. Obviously, I think Leeds at the time, obviously, could have used an Abramovich coming along. London is interesting. Yeah, the London clubs do have a wide catchment area. West Ham is more East London and Essex and the East Anglia for their fan base. Leyton Orient the same. Millwall and Charlton compete for fans in South London and Kent. Palace, actually, some of our Palace fans are from Surrey and Sussex, but again, Wimbledon same. Brentford, Fulham, and Chelsea. That's a congested market. QPR. People forget about QPR. That's the thing. You've got Brentford, Chelsea, and Fulham, and then you've got QPR in there as well. So West London is very congested. North London's congested with Spurs and Tottenham, and of course Boreham Wood now are on the about in there as well. You've got Barnet. You've got Dagenham and Redbridge as well, trying to survive alongside Leyton Orient and West Ham, trying to attract fans and investment. Sutton United. Yeah, but I think Boreham Wood is classed as London now. It is classed as a London club. So it is a very, very congested market in London. But it's the same with the Northwest. It's a very, very congested market. There's not a lot of room for error when it comes to trying to sell yourself to that sports market. So there is a bit of family bit. I mean, the East End of London, it was West Ham or Leyton Orient. That was your club in East London. South London, it was Charlton or Millwall. South West London, it's Palace or Wimbledon. West London, you've got a very congested. West London is very, very congested. Because you have Chelsea, Fulham, QPR, and Brentford, very congested in West London. South London Sport Arsenal, you've got to be very brave to do that. You've got to be very brave to be from South London and support Spurs or Arsenal. Honestly, people don't realise that there's still that aspect of the neighbourhood you're in. You've got to south. If you're south of the river and you choose the wrong football club, you are in trouble. That's why a lot of the London clubs have the home counties, because a lot of families moved out of London in the 40s, 50s, and 60s into the new towns, into the southeast, and into those the new towns and towns and cities outside of London where new developments were built. So my area where I live, there's been a lot of um, people moving out of London into the home, what we call the home counties, so basically the southeast and East Anglia. Um, it's the same with any major city that the catchment areas um, go far out, which is why the London clubs have massive fan bases. Is like West Ham draws in fans from all over East Anglia and Essex. Leighton Orient has fans out in Essex. Charlton and Millwall have fans out into Kent and into Sussex. Same with Palace, into Surrey and Sussex. Wimbledon is obviously a cult club, obviously with its history. You can't gauge how big London really is. If you've been to Birmingham, double it. If you've been to Birmingham or Manchester, just double that. That's basically what London's like. Is double the size of Birmingham, about double the size of Greater Manchester. So if you've been to any other big city like Cardiff or Birmingham, double that or quadruple that, and that's what London's like. But London is massive. It's sprawling. It does overwhelm people, especially if you're from like a more rural or small market town, that kind of thing. It can be very overwhelming. But if you're already from a big town or a big city anyway, or a very urban area, it's, it is what it is. You know when you're in London though, because you just know. You know when you're in Greater London. Um, could any London club be big? Yes, yes, absolutely. I would class Brentford now as a big club, and Fulham, absolutely, because you're on your doorstep. You've got eight, 25 million people, not just in London but in the southeast, as potential fans. Yeah, of course. That is just in Greater London and the southeast, and the southeast takes in Essex, Suffolk, up to Bedfordshire. Wiltshire is technically South Central, but bits of Wiltshire and Hampshire could be classed as southeast, depending on the stats you look at and what geographical area you're doing as the cut-off point of London and the, the southeast geographically. Yeah, you've got a massive population, um, and which is why some of the regional clubs in the southeast and south central, like Swindon, for example, or Brighton, have, I wouldn't say struggled because both have been Premier League clubs. Swindon have won silverware, and like clubs like Luton have won silverware. But why they get struggle to build the fan base on a more national level is London is big, absolutely, and there's money in London, not a corporate money. Not all of inside the M25 is London. There's still bits of Surrey, Sussex, and Kent inside the M25, um, and Hertfordshire, and Buckinghamshire inside the M25. So that's sort of, you could class that as London, but it's not. But it is. But it isn't. But Greater London, just use the M25 basically as the limits of what London's going to be. Um, in saying that, yeah, the fact that Dulwich Hamlet and Sutton United in the non-league and lower leagues are getting good crowds tells you all you need to know about how important football is to Greater London, and how even if they are getting thousands of people at home games, it just tells you all you need to know about the sport. Um, but then you go to places like Watford, and crowd numbers are good. So, but as I say, it's a very interesting sporting landscape. Um, in London. Uh, but yeah, to really give you an idea, if you've only been to London once, I would say if you've been to Birmingham more than once, if you've been to Manchester more than once, just double it. Manchester and Birmingham are insane enough. Um, it's just a bigger version. Um, yeah, I mean, look, match day in London is insane, but a match day at any football club is insane. Um, there are certain just the match days just the, put it into perspective. I don't think it matters where you are. A match day is a match day. Um, Stadium atmosphere is going to be stadium atmosphere, regardless of where you are. I would say Liverpool has that London feel about it. But as I say, match day is match day. It doesn't matter what stadium you're going to, if it's home or away. Um, it the atmosphere is the atmosphere. Going to and from the game is exactly the same. I wouldn't say the atmosphere in London is any different to the atmosphere outside of London. Um, but it's been so long since I've been to a match of any in any sport, to a game, that. But I've travelled in London on match day. I've been to London on match day. You know, I've done the match day experience as a teenager. Um, it's always going to be the same. What Frome Town make it third round? Yeah, Somerset is one of those counties, and if that's if you are classing Bristol as part of Somerset, that on the professional footballing landscape, apart from the Oval Town, there's nothing to write home about. Much like Cornwall, much like Dorset, if that's if you class Bournemouth as part of Dorset or part of Hampshire, depending on how you look at it. There are certain parts of the country where professional football is lacking, where it's more rugby union or cricket. Um, and that's what's really interesting is people obviously think that um, you know every county is football mad and they all have this is North America. And in reality, you look at it, and there are some parts of the country that it doesn't really register on the same level as rugby union or rugby. As I said, there's some parts of the north which even rugby league has struggles establishing itself. So there are some areas where certain sports just do not work. Southwest England is more cricket and rugby union, and cricket is by far more successful than rugby union in some locations, like Somerset. Um, Cornwall's just a sporting backwater. And again, it's to do with the infrastructure, it's to do with the location, the ability of potential fans to spend money. So the local economy um, has a big impact on the sporting landscape of a location and population size and population density. Cornwall is a desert when it comes to professional sport, um, or even semi-professional sport. I think the most famous sportsman to come out of Cornwall is Phil Vickery. Um, I would say, yeah, because that's the closest professional club to Cornwall. It's just across the Tamar, and you got Saltash the other side. So, yeah, their catchment area would be East Cornwall, absolutely. Um, and there you go. The geography and the population density says Plymouth will attract fans from Cornwall. Um, Exeter will attract fans from Dorset and Somerset because of its geographical location, even though it's in Devon. Bournemouth will attract fans from Dorset and potentially Somerset and potentially Wiltshire because of its location. Um, Same with Southampton. Um, so there are and that is and then the issue is when you look at the transport infrastructure. Um, It just isn't there. The motorway ends at Exeter, so you can see why Cornwall hasn't really developed the sporting, uh, uh, you know, the sporting economy and the athlete development um, that other areas of the country have. It's the same with parts of Scotland. I mean, you've got Inverness, Cally Thistle, and Ross County, and then you have nothing. Um, you can see why the majority of football clubs in Scotland are basically based around the Glasgow, Edinburgh areas, and potentially and bits of the east coast like Dundee and Aberdeen, because that's where the people live. That's where most of the infrastructure is, transport infrastructure, and in certain aspects, that's where the money is. It is, yeah. Cornwall. A lot of people said it's very similar to Mid Wales, and that is correct. The culture is very, very similar. The landscape's very similar. It's very rural, um, and unfortunately for Cornwall, the economy is heavily linked to tourism, of which sport could be a potential. And average salaries are very, very low. Um, and there's not a lot of disposable income for potential sports fans to spend money. This is why I think that placing a professional rugby league side in Cornwall may not be the best idea. I'm all for growing the game outside of traditional areas, um, the rugby league heartland. I'm all for that. But I would think that the Midlands, the southeast, maybe south central kind of area would have been a better bet for disposable income and attracting new fans. I mean, there are parts of the Thames Valley, for example, that have got the youngest average age of residents. So the area I live in, we've got the youngest average age of residents. It's a very young area. It depends what the filling is in the pasty. If it's a meat-based pasty, it's got to be beef or pork or chicken. Veggie pasties, not so much. As I say, it's got to depend on the filling. Um, but as I say, like Cornwall has got an older population, a poorer population, and a very small population. So there's no surprise that and I do wonder how will having Cornish Rugby League Football Club, Rugby League Football Club, um, are they going to be a success? Is that actually going to benefit the sport? And are they going to be able to actually start winning a lot more games than they lose? So this season they're better than last season. Um, is it the right location to have a team? Could a different location be a better bet, like Swindon or Reading or Exeter or Plymouth or Bournemouth, Southampton, somewhere else in the south outside of the southeast? Because the southwest, you're in rugby union country, um, and um, Plymouth and Exeter do have the population. Exeter's, I think, a wealthier city than Plymouth. Plymouth has that military connection. Exeter is a university city, so there's a lot of students there. There's a lot of investment in both cities, but I will say this: they are a little bit in the arse end of nowhere. Once you get past Exeter in the southwest, yeah, other than Plymouth, there is not much transport infrastructure. It is very rural. Um, once you're past Exeter, apart from Brixham area, that's Torquay, that's Paynton, that's Brixham. Um, there's not a lot of urban areas that are quite sizable. You really are getting into the arse end of nowhere, other than Plymouth metro area, and after that, it is small villages and very, 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 very dispersed population. Um, and the further west you go, the poorer you get. Um, the further west you go, and northwest you go, so you've got the national parks like Dartmoor and Bodmin and all that. The more reliant on tourism and seasonal income workers are reliant on, and employment, and it's I do think. Well, I understand that you know the Ottawa Aces was not going to work. I don't think placing a team in Cornwall necessarily is going to work economically and be profitable. Rugby league already struggles to make a profit as it is. I would have thought you want to grow the game in a location, the south of England, the Midlands is a way to do it. There are other locations south of Birmingham which you can do it. Places like Swindon, Reading, Bournemouth, Southampton, Winchester. That's got a very vibrant community. That's got good transport links. You know, there are other places you could have done it, which have the infrastructure in place and a bigger population in place, bigger potential fan base in place. So yeah, I'm looking at it and I'm going, "Hmm, while it's brave, we shall see what happens." Yeah, some parts of Cornwall and Devon are very isolated. Yes, I've got family in that part of the world, and yeah, it can be a bit. You are a bit in the arse end of nowhere, a bit isolated. And when bad weather hits, like a winter storm, and up on the moors, it can snow from like the end of October through till the end of April. You can get snow up and Dartmoor or Exmoor or Bodmin. That it can be, you know, quite an isolated. Um, and I think that's an issue with professional sport in that part of the world is the isolation aspect. It's the same with parts of Scotland and parts of Cumbria, for example, or the old Cumberland, Westmoreland area, parts of like Northumberland as well, outside of the Newcastle area or Tyne and Wear. It's a bit similar. Parts of Yorkshire are quite isolated. So parts of East Anglia, there's not a lot. So you can see certain issues with certain areas why there's that lack of professional sport, that lack of sport and talent coming through because there's a lack of people or a lack of money, or it's a very rural, lots of small little villages dotted around or small towns dotted around. But it is a thing. Parts of Wales you won't see a person for 4 hours driving down country roads, and suddenly you're in Aberystwyth. But for the previous several hours, you may not have seen anyone on the roads. You might be going through the mountains of Wales, and like suddenly you're there, and there's a university town. Um, but yeah, I that's you can see why certain areas, sports leagues and teams aren't making money. And I think you can see why rugby union in Wales is struggling financially, and why there's only a handful of top level, decent level professional football clubs. Um, but if we were to have like the franchise model in every UK sport, every league, I don't think that would work either. Um, I think our promotion relegation structure and the club structure we have now does work better. Um, but you can see why certain areas that's where all the success and comes, the northwest, London, the Midlands, and parts of the northeast is where all the football clubs are successful. Bristol does surprise me that their lack of success does, but you can see why the majority of trophies go to the northwest and London. Um, uh, well, you can debate the pros and cons of transport infrastructure and wanting to protect the natural environment over economic development. That's a debate that's been had for 50 years. Basically, since the national parks started to be set up and more national parks get added, um, that's a debate, as I say, that's been had for quite some time. And that debate continues about, maybe adding more national parks, maybe expanding the national parks we already have to more areas. And with that obviously comes, you know, professional sport as well, as an activity, or sports in general, and outdoor activities such as horse riding or cycling, mountain biking, you know, cross country running, which also have that professional aspect to them as well, when it comes to sport and land use. Is driving through England quicker? Because some days it feels like it's not. And as someone who works out on the roads and outdoors, if you've got an accident but you've also got roadworks on the alternate route, trust me, it can be. Oh, we've not moved very far. Uh, the fact that, yeah, Cardiff to Wrexham is quicker through England than through Wales is sums up um, a lot of issues that Wales as a country and as a region of the UK, and parts of Wales are facing. That does sum up a lot of issues. Um, and I think that has also impacted the fact that the Welsh football clubs that play in the English system have also struggled for that success. Um, and you know, why there's a lack of investment in Welsh sport. Um, you know, that is a byproduct. If you're not getting that investment in stadium infrastructure, ease of access for fans, it puts off potential investors. It puts off someone wanting to come in and go, I'll invest in this club because they know the return. Um, so it does impact crowd numbers. It does impact finances. It's hard. It's difficult and awkward for fans to get to games. And if you are, especially at the lower levels, more reliant on fans and attendance for income, it's going to have a knock-on impact when you've got empty seats and can't sell out because there's difficulties in getting to and from the stadium, for example. And if you, that tells you all you need to know. Well, that's one of the reasons why Wrexham probably have struggled financially, um, off the field for many years. Is that infrastructure aspect of the wider community, of getting fans in and out of the ground and getting, you know that does have an impact. It can put fans off going to games because of the travel difficulties and the accessibility. Um, but look, we'll have to see what happens going forward with Wrexham. They found it tough to start this season, but that was expected. It is a step up, and any step up, it's a step up in level, and it does have its drawbacks. But I think they're going to stay in the football league. They're not going to get relegated. There are other clubs that are worse than them. Um, well, the Welsh Premier, we've discussed this before about domestic sport in Wales. Um, below the English, league system with the Welsh clubs that play in the English league system, and below the United Rugby Championship, there are massive problems. There's not a lot of spare cash floating around. Um, Attendances are poor. Of course, Newport will stay up. They've got enough resources to stay up. Fan numbers are good. The club's starting to make some money. They've established themselves now back in the football league. I think Newport County will be fine. I think it is good for Wales having four clubs in the English, top four professional leagues. Admittedly, none are in the Premier League right now. Two are in the Championship, two are in League Two. But I think it's good for Welsh football. I think the Welsh national side having their, getting to major tournaments, qualifying for a lot of major tournaments has helped. And there's a lot of good young Welsh players starting to be recognised and scouted by Premier League and Championship clubs, and that are getting game time throughout the four, Premier League to League Two. There's some good Welsh players floating, or eligible players floating around the National League and National League North and South as well. So suddenly we are starting to see the growth of the sport in Wales again, players developing again. Um, Rugby union take notes. Rugby union take note. This is where that argument of combining the English and Welsh club games and having a combined Anglo-Welsh league grows for rugby union. Rugby league, they do it. Football, they do it. I think it's a matter of time before rugby union has to, concede defeat. The Welsh Rugby Union and the RFU, the WRU and the RFU need to start collaborating together. They need to work together. The old Anglo Welsh Cup was a great tournament 10, 15 years ago. Resurrect that potentially. Could be a way to spark life back into to the sport. Um, but this is the situation we find ourselves in. Finances are a mess. The structures are a mess. The governance is a mess, and there's a lot of negativity surrounding both the RFU and the WIU. How can you see Ealing and the Ospreys merging? Ealing is in West London. The Ospreys are in Swansea. That's different at the opposite ends of the M4 there. You've got one in the M4 in London, and the other at the other end of the M4 in Swansea. I don't see that. I can see them playing against each other if you had that combined Anglo-Welsh league, but I can't see them merging because Ealing are in West London and the Ospreys are based in Swansea. So that's either end of the M4. Can't see that. Appreciate the enthusiasm, but I can't see that one working. It would be interesting if we do see Scottish teams as well looking at potentially um, uh, looking at the same option of combining the Scottish clubs uh, into a mainland British league system that involves Welsh, English, and Scottish clubs. That is that's something that's never been discussed before. But Glasgow and Edinburgh seem to be much better run than the Welsh regions in the URC. Glasgow have always had a strong side, and Edinburgh have developed some good players as well over the years. Um, but again, when we're talking about life being put back into the club game, we need to look at the finances. We need to look at the structures of clubs. We need to look at the governance of the game and leagues and unions cooperating more with each other, which is something that we don't see enough of. There's a reason why the South African teams have all completely left the Super Rugby system. There's a reason why the URC has rebranded itself multiple times from the Pro League and before that to the Celtic League. Um, there's a reason for that. There's a reason why money is being lost. Why the game is not at club level profitable. And you could argue that professionalism hasn't truly worked financially in the aspect. Players have got paid. Some players have made some really good coin out of professionalism, but the structures in place are just not up to the standard. They try to copy professional football and to a certain extent rugby league, and it's because each country has a different system when it comes to their league system, and you've got like this semi-club, semi-franchise model in place. It's yeah, it is a bit of a mess. The money in rugby union is in France and in North America at the moment, and Japan. Japan, North America, and France is where, in the club game at least, your club is going to be financially sound and you are going to get paid. You're guaranteed a decent paycheck. Um, your club is not going to go bust overnight, and you're not going to be wondering if you're going to be able to pay the bills next week. You're going to get paid on time. The club game is I believe, well governed and is well run financially. The rest of the world is a mess. We've discussed Australia. We've discussed Wales and England. We've discussed the collapse of Super Rugby. Even the fact that New Zealand has money issues should tell people that there are issues there. Fiji? Yes, it was their first win. I can't see Japan joining the URC because of the fact they're on the other side of the world, and that would definitely be an issue logistically. But the domestic league in Japan is well funded, well structured, and could, is a good league to play. It's a good quality level. It's good quality club level. But see, the Super Rugby idea is a mess. They completely cocked it up in previous years. They've made a mess of it. They've lost the South African teams. It's been really badly run, and it's cost too much money. It's been financially ruinous. Um, if we look at the state of rugby in Australia, and now the precarious aspects of finances in New Zealand as well, was is Super Rugby sustainable long term? You know, with the current format that there is. Yeah, a week to go to the Rugby World Cup, and I'm not seeing the fanfare and the interest that we did 4 years ago and in previous builds up to tournaments. Um, I think the media, especially in Europe, have been very, very negative around, apart from Ireland and France, very, very negative, especially England and Wales. Scotland seems to be going under the radar, but I can't see Scotland getting past the quarterfinals. I see them getting out the group. Can't see them getting past the quarterfinals. But there's a lot of negativity around rugby union at the moment, and some squad selections have raised eyebrows, and the form of some big nations going into the tournament is worrying. England, Wales, and Australia, I think, are very, very vulnerable to having their worst World Cups ever. And then, we could see coaches lose their jobs. We could see heads roll. And other nations are going in with a lot of confidence, good form, and record-breaking wins. Ireland, France, South Africa. New Zealand, I don't think New Zealand are going to win. There are some vulnerabilities there, and their discipline hasn't been great as well. The Barrett family seem to get most of the red cards New Zealand have ever had. I think it's going to be a very difficult World Cup to predict. How they draw the World Cup groups, I think, needs to change. I do. And it's always the same nations in the same groups against each other as well. Like Italy always seems to end up in the same groups as Scotland or Wales, for example. Argentina seems to end up in the same group as England in recent World Cups. Before it used to be Ireland, Argentina, now it seems to be England, Argentina in the same group for the last couple of World Cups. Scotland seem to get either the Springboks or Australia or in their group. It does seem interesting that the same countries always get drawn in the same group. We do need to change how the groups are formed and selected. The group stages have already been organised before all teams have qualified. You wouldn't see that in a football World Cup. So there is some changes. I think a lot of fans have said we need to change how the groups are organised and drawn. But I'm going to watch as many games as I can. I won't be able to watch all the games, but I am looking forwards to the tournament in an aspect of, hey, it's World Cup. There's going to be some fun stories that come up. There's going to be some shocks. I think more shocks in this World Cup than in previous World Cups. But they do need to look at how the groups are drawn and organised because they are becoming very predictable now. But I am looking forward to this World Cup. In a sense that I'm going to be able to cover as many games as I can. I do enjoy my international team sports. When it comes to rugby union, I do enjoy the international game. So it's going to be interesting. It's going to be fun. But the build-up is a very muted build-up. Well, 2014, look, the World Cup has expanded from its initial foundations in the 80s and 90s. I wouldn't say 24 is too many because some of these tier 2 and tier 3 nations are starting to become really competitive. But it all depends on growing the player base and the quality level and improving the quality of those tier 2 and tier 3 nations. But at the same time, rugby union does have a lot of issues. And I don't think World Rugby is dealing with those issues effectively. Um, but if the quality level of the tier two and tier three nations continues to improve, then an expanded World Cup is going to happen. But we've had the same debate in football as well. Rugby league is the next World Cup is going to contract. They're going to have less teams, um, and they may bring back an emerging nations World Cup, which they should never have got rid of. But that's another debate to have for another day. But we don't know who's going to be hosting the next Rugby League World Cup in 3 years' time. So international sport, I think, is at a crossroads when it comes to international sporting events and sporting organisations. Then they need to look at increasing squad sizes. Then I think is the logical explanation. Increase the squad sizes by 3 to 5 players. That could be the only solution to. If you want to expand, then the squad sizes do need to be bigger. That's all the tournament needs to be that little bit longer with more rest days because again the gap between games has been criticised as well. But look, we'll see what happens, and we'll see if the same arguments about some of the smaller nations having less turnaround time in between games and player injuries and fatigue levels and some rule changes because they don't bring rule changes in to experiment well. How the games play out, will they go to the form guides, that kind of thing. There's a lot of debates to be had, and we are going to have them at some point. There's going to be some talking points coming out of this World Cup. There's going to be some controversy, no doubt. There's going to be that controversial sin bin or red card. There's going to be that surprising result. There's going to be that shock result. I do think England and Wales. There's a lot of focus being put upon Warren Gatland and Steve Borthwick as coaches. Both the issues that they've inherited. I know Gatland left and came back, but the issues they've inherited, the structural problems, the finances, not their fault, but some of their selections. I mean, Wales have been beset by players retiring from international rugby or moving outside of Wales. They're not eligible for selection. So Gatland's basically going with a very inexperienced squad, and Borthwick, the English club game with 3 clubs going bust again. I don't know. Who I think will win it? It's very open. France, Ireland, South Africa, Argentina are a good dark horse. The All Blacks, never count them out. They're your 5 teams that I think are going to be the ones to look at. We are going to see some shocks. We are going to see a tier 2 or tier 3 nation beat a more established nation in the group stage. We're going to see a big nation fail to get out the group stage, like a Wales or an England. It's going to happen. There's going to be some surprise upsets. South Africa have had it 2015 with Japan. There's going to be some surprise results. The fact that Fiji have now beaten England, their tails are up. They're going to be dangerous. But there's only a handful of nations I think can win it. Ireland, France, Argentina, South Africa, and the All Blacks. One of those 5 is going to win it. We could see an all-European final. Argentina can make the final because they've now also beaten the All Blacks. So on their day, they can beat the All Blacks. They can beat the Springboks. So for me, where we are right now, very open, very unpredictable. England or Wales won't get out of the pool, and then questions will be raised about Warren Gatland and Steve Borthwick. Will they survive? I think if England or Wales, depending which one gets out of the pool stage, even Australia may not get out of the pool stage. I think Argentina are going to batter Wales. They're going to batter England. Then we have to start asking questions about what is going on with, player development, scouting, selection, the state of the club game, which, there's clubs going out of business below the Premiership as well. The rule changes, the impact, the tackling rule changes, the impacts that had on the game. Questions will be asked about the state of rugby union in the Northern Hemisphere. And if Australia fail to get out of the pool stage or struggle at this World Cup, questions are going to be asked in Australia. There's going to be some heads rolling of some head coaches. Um, no doubt. I think Argentina are going to dominate their pool. I think South Africa are going to be big dogs in this as well. Ireland and France, the two best nations in the world. I think New Zealand have slipped a little bit and are looking vulnerable, but are still dangerous if they get it going. But there's some issues within the All Black squad. Well, North Wales isn't a rugby union heartland, is it really? North Wales isn't really. A lot of fans in North Wales feel disconnected from the sport and undervalued by the sport. So they've turned their backs on the sport. There's no surprise there. If you undervalue your fan base and you don't invest in the infrastructure, they're going to look elsewhere for their sporting fix or their participation. That's something that I think the WRU have really failed with, is engaging with fans outside of the south of Wales. The majority of Wales doesn't feel a connection to the national side or the club game. And so they look elsewhere for, their participation in sport, their support of sport, or they just turn their backs on sport altogether. Um, and, there's a reason why there's that disconnect. And there is a reason why the sport isn't popular. People think Wales is rugby union mad. A large proportion of Wales doesn't feel that connection. And that's got to be down to the WRU, the way they've structured the four provinces. But then again, you look at the Celtic Crusaders, they lasted a season and it didn't work. So they tried to engage, tried to grow the sport, or strengthen the sport outside the South of Wales and the region of mid to North Wales, and it just did not work. It did not work. Attendances were poor. It failed. So they tried before and it didn't work. Now, I think they need to scrap the regions and go back to the pure club game, absolutely. But there isn't the money. And we're, the situation Welsh Rugby Union finds itself in is a messy one. And it's not easily resolved. And I don't know where, how you fix it, but the status quo is not sustainable. If the sport is to flourish, grow, and be profitable. Oh, look, I think, obviously the population is concentrated in Cardiff, Swansea, and in surrounding towns and cities in South Wales. Absolutely, that's where the money is. That's where the jobs is. That is how things are. Um, I think football and rugby, it's about 50-50. I think, although Swansea and Cardiff and Newport are football mad, Newport do get good crowds in the rugby. Cardiff obviously are very successful in the rugby. Llanelli, obviously, rugby is better than football. You could argue the success. Swansea, I think football is. I think rugby's starting to lose to football in regards of attracting new fans, keeping existing fans, and there's no and selling out. As in selling out grounds. Fans go to football matches. They don't go to rugby matches. You could argue the younger fans have turned their back on rugby union, and they're more into their football participation as well. I think Gareth Bale, Aaron Ramsey effect over the last decade and a half is clearly now being felt. They've got the poster boys, and yes, Bale's now retired, and Aaron Ramsey's winding down his career, but these are successful players who've won silverware at club level, had a lot of caps, been record cap holders, capped in their country, and obviously have played overseas, which sells it a little bit. Being successful overseas, and it it, it It is what it is. Wales have a national cricket team. They do. It's the English and Wales Cricket Board. It's the ECB. England and Wales are represented by one country at Test level, so they do. But it's only Glamorgan that really play county cricket. Or Glamorgan is where the players play, but cricket isn't very popular in Wales because of football and rugby union, and especially in the south of Wales. It is cricket is Glamorgan. Maybe Monmouthshire at a push where players come from, but they play for Glamorgan. Um, and some good Welsh players have played for England, basically, which is England and Wales, but England's just easier to, yeah. And most cricketers see themselves as English than Welsh. It's not a very popular sport. Um, in Wales, it's not seen as popular. It's rugby union or football, really, in Wales that gets bums on seats. But in reality, it's football in Wales that's now getting bums on seats, not rugby union. So there's that. Anyway, I'm going to call that a stream. It's 9 o'clock now. It's been very, very entertaining discussing all the sport topics. Um, so yes, I'm going to call it a stream. Thank you very much, obviously, for all your questions. We've discussed a lot. We've discussed a lot of tennis. That was interesting. And so there we go. Thank you very much for your questions. There'll be more content tomorrow. There'll be some NRL content over the weekend as well because the season's winding down. And we've got to look at who's going to be minor premiers. Obviously, West Tigers have got the wooden spoon, but that wasn't surprising considering their loss streak to start the season. The fact they got some wins and took it down to the last couple of weeks of the season is amazing to even me. Tim Sheen's done a coaching now. It's now Benji Marshall and Robbie Farah's team to take forward. But look at some of the stats. They actually had a very good second half of the season in regards to scoring and defence, but the damage had been done. And at the moment, no. The protests are still happening in regards to the Spanish FA. There was the awards ceremony in Monaco, was it last night? And Serena Wiegmann, in her acceptance speech of women's coach of the year, basically sort of hinted at the English FA's support for the Spanish players. Obviously, Rubiales being suspended, being absent. Roja, obviously, so I think a Spanish delegate was there. So there was some speeches made by players and coaches, and that's continuing. Obviously, it's a 90-day suspension, so there's another 2.5 months of this before we find out if he's banned or not. There may or may not be a criminal investigation opened under the sexual harassment laws that Spain has. Whether they actually go through and enforce it is another thing. There's still protests, but at the moment, Vidala is, whatever his name is it Vidala? I think it is still women's head coach. He hasn't resigned or been sacked. And the protests continuing. So we'll have to check. I haven't seen anything that suggests, but we'll see what happens post the international break, because I do think there will be some movement with the international break and that taking place. That's going to put the pressure on the Spanish FA because the men's team are playing. But at the same time, there's the men's team playing, I think, is a nice distraction. At the same time, there will be protests and there will be questions asked about why the women's head coach is still in his role, considering that all his support staff and a lot of the assistant coaches have all resigned in protest. Players are boycotting, so it'd be interesting if any male Spanish players join their female counterparts and in what numbers. That will be interesting to note if a lot of key players for the Spain national side in the men's game refuse to play. And obviously, FIFA are looking into Rubiales. The Spanish FA, there are last reports they were looking into options to sack the women's head coach. There's not a lot they can do whilst FIFA are investigating. If they were to act, and react in a sense and go, right, we're getting rid of you, before FIFA's done its investigation, that can prove its own difficulties. But as far as I know, not a lot has happened in the last couple of days, really. Protests are still being made, statements are still being made by those angry at the Spanish FA. And But some delegates the other day from the regional FAs wanted structural reform. I think the Balearics, the Canary Islands, and I think Andalusia. Um, I think there was a handful of the regional FAs have said, look, we need to restructure, we need to reform. There hasn't been any press conferences or any more statements given. There's only been the opinions given from the outside. So until a regional delegate member calls a press conference and says that this is what we want as delegates to the Spanish FA and as members of the Spanish FA, this is what we're pushing for, and we get a couple of delegates from some of the regional FAs saying that this is our corner, this is our part of the FA, we're pushing for this, we're tabling this motion publicly, then well, we don't know. But it's a messy period, and I think Spanish football's been in a mess for a while on the administration side, the governance side, and off the field in clubland. There's been issues plaguing the game over in Spain for a long, long time. It's all come to a head right now. But if it wasn't this scandal, it would have been another scandal. Would have created some kind of issue. But I think this was the scandal that I think has created the movement now for structural reform and cultural change within football in Spain. Um, but anyway, I'm going to leave that there. Thank you very much for all your questions. It's a good point to leave on. I will be checking the headlines and seeing if anything else has actually happened. But the fact that viewers haven't said, "Have you checked this out? Have you seen this news?" says to me that not a lot's happened. Transfer deadline day, obviously, the transfer window shuts in a couple of hours. We may see some signings happen, but I think any decent club would have got its signings done early. Mason Greenwood situation, will he get signed in this window? What happens? That will be interesting. But he'll never play for Man United again, I don't think. I think they're trying to facilitate a loan move followed by a permanent move at some point. He probably ends up in Europe, if I'm honest, but there are some European leagues and clubs that don't want him. But from what I gather from reports, clubs have contacted Manchester United about signing him either on loan or permanently, or getting him out of his contract. So we'll see what happens. For me, for now, thank you very much for watching, and I'll have some more content for you soon.